Okay, folks, can I formally welcome everybody to the committee meeting this morning of the Social Development Committee, and to just the normal housekeeping, just obviously having declared the meeting open to the public, could I advise members of all the protocols around the use of electronic devices, the tablet devices and so on. Could I ask everybody in the room then to switch off all their electronic devices, and could remind members when they're referring to our papers if they could use the number at the top of the page. Okay. And could I ask any member of the committee to declare any interest relevant to the issues being discussed today? There are none being declared. Move on to apologies. We have apologies from Michael Copeland.
Morris Devaney.
And with apologies from Morris Devaney. Thank you, Paula, for that. Moving on to the draft minutes. Draft minutes for the 8th of January. On page 10 of the members' packs, members content for the adopt the minutes as drafted for accuracy. All agreed?
Great.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of matters arising. Just to note that page 14 of your tabled items I've included an updated proposal timetable for the remainder of this inquiry, both phase 2 and 3, and this includes consideration of evidence, and it's been drafted in the assumption that today's evidence session with Mr Brimstone will be the last. I tempt fate. Although if members feel strongly that there is a need to hear from further witnesses, this will have to be taken, of course, into full consideration. And as I've already noted, this is a proposed initial review of the evidence scheduled for next Thursday, so that we can consider if there are any other issues which come to our mind which need to be developed. So are members content then with that schedule as tabled, subject to change on decision of the committee? Okay. Moving on then to the item 7, which is the committee inquiry itself. We have Stephen Brimstone here this morning as a witness. You'll note, just to remind members, that you've been provided with a cover note and possible questions which may assist with today's briefing at page 3 of your tabled items. Relevant evidence documents are included from page 37 onwards of the main pack. That will include the redacted draft apologies that were provided by Councillor Jenny Palmer, and they're also included at page 6 of members' tabled items. Just for the record, then, for Mr Brimstone, that the committee considered an application from the department for a legal advisor to attend the evidence session with Mr Brimstone in an advisory capacity. Now, the committee informed the department that it had rejected that request on the basis that a witness giving evidence voluntarily, whether under oath or affirmation or not, may refuse to answer any question, including answering questions that may expose him or herself to civil, disciplinary or criminal proceedings. And well, I just wanted to remind formally Mr Brimstone that option, of course, remains open today. Furthermore, just want to further advise the department in a letter of 18th of December that we did advise the department in a letter on the 18th of December that it is the committee's view that this is a matter upon which the witnesses, if they attend voluntarily, can, if they so choose, seek their own legal advice before attending the meeting and answer or decline to answer questions accordingly within their legal framework. It is the committee's view that the witness has had ample time to seek such legal advice and prepare accordingly for today's evidence session. And I would just then just to remind the committee and advise the committee formally that Mr Brimstone has, of course, agreed to give evidence today under affirmation. And on that basis, Stephen, if you wish to obviously come forward, and if you're satisfied with that outline that I've just provided, and you're confirming that you're taking an affirmation, then I would ask the clerk to bring around a copy of that, which you will read into the record.
I, Steve Brimstone, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be truthful and honest, and that I will give the committee all such information and assistance as I can to enable it to discharge its responsibilities.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. As is customary in these situations, Stephen, you've been here on a number of occasions, so you're aware of the procedure. Is there any opening statement that you wish to make? You've received all of the kind of evidence and the paperwork that we've obliged to provide to you. I take it, just remind members then you to have cover note on page 3 of the tabled items. And other material to this inquiry this morning are on page 37 of your main pack. Okay. Okay, Mickey Braley.
Good morning, Stephen. Thanks for coming. It was just to clarify a few issues that there appears to be some conflicting evidence around.
Speak up, Mickey, please speak up.
Sorry, just to go back to the phone call. In evidence on the 16th of October, in answer to questions from Mr. Alistair, you were asked who decided that you would make contact with Jenny Palmer on the 1st of July 2011. At that time you said your recollection of events was that it had been discussed with the Minister as an appropriate next step. He wanted to ensure that the Board was adequately informed of his position. He felt it appropriate to make contact with Councillor Palmer. And then Mr. Alistair asked you, it was you and the Minister and no one else who decided that Mrs. Palmer would be contacted. You answered yes. In a programme, in an interview the day after the programme, the Spotlight programme, the Minister was asked by Mark Brothers, should you not have known that he was going to make that, sorry, did you know he was going to make that phone call? And Nelson McCausland answered no. Should you not have known he was going to make that phone call? And Mr. McCausland answered that was a bizarre and ludicrous question. So basically, on the one hand, you gave us evidence to the effect that the Minister and yourself had discussed this, so he would have obviously been aware that Mrs. Palmer was going to be contacted. But he then, subsequent or previously, in terms of the programme, stated very clearly his answer was a definitive no. So I'm just wondering, can you give us some insight maybe into why that would have?
Sorry, just a record, it was the View programme,
Yes, the View
that interview
programme.
was conducted about the Spotlight
And
programme.
it was the day after, I think, the Spotlight programme.
And if I can recall right, the Minister, when he gave evidence to the committee, had a different view, if that's right.
So he changed his recollection, presumably, then, on that.
But when he gave his evidence, he had a different recollection.
Although he was very definite on the programme, his answer was a definitive no. He didn't elaborate, he didn't give any other detail, he simply said no. You know, I would assume you, as a special advisor, would not off your own bat have made that phone call.
Yes.
So there would have had to be some discussion, presumably, between yourself and the Minister in relation to Mrs. Palmer being contacted at all.
Yeah. And if I go back to my evidence on the 16th of October, on page 2,
Yep.
bottom of page 2, I give the background to that.
Yeah, you said in that it was discussed, and the Minister felt that it would be useful for me to contact Councillor Palmer to ensure she's fully aware of his concerns. I undertook to contact Councillor Palmer. Very clearly from that, it's your understanding that the Minister is very much aware Councillor Palmer is going to be contacted, yet he stated definitively no about the phone call.
Well, I think the Minister, when he came to this committee and he gave evidence to this committee, was clear that he assumed that a conversation had been had.
But you
I'm
can't,
happy.
sorry, you can't see that there was a conflict if you look at take an overview of the evidence that there is a conflict.
I can't answer for conflict in someone else's evidence. If that's there, are you saying there's a conflict in my evidence?
Well, there's a conflict in the evidence, because on the one hand, you're saying that the Minister knew about the conversation. The Minister said that he didn't. So there's an
At the
obvious
committee or on the programme?
on the programme.
But at the committee, what did he say?
Well, Obviously, in his evidence to the committee was different from the evidence that or the answer that he gave to the programme.
Yes.
So again, there's conflict.
But the conflict is with the former minister's evidence, potentially.
Well, and that's what, I'm really asking the question to try and discover the nature of the conflict and the reason possibly for the conflict.
I can't answer to that, I'm afraid.
Just in moving on, in your evidence again on the 16th of October, you had said that you had spoken to Councillor Palmer, obviously, about Red Sky, but you also said that you had asked about leeway and maintain, so there are other issues in that conversation. But in documents that we've received, some of which are redacted, it states very clearly that, and this is from Peter Robinson, both were agreed that the only issue, and this is yourself and Councillor Palmer, presumably us both, were agreed that the only issue discussed during the conversation was the board's consideration of the contractor Red Sky. There's no mention of any other.
In all of the drafts?
Well, in the four of them, certainly. The Councillor Palmer did give evidence that the fifth draft was different from the previous four.
Again, this is a party statement that's put together. I can't comment on that. The words were the words of the First Minister, potentially, in a draft statement.
But you can see where I'm coming from, that surely the First Minister, not having been personally involved in the conversation, could only issue a statement based on the evidence that he received.
I think we should, first of all, I just want to make it clear, there's two things. We can't determine what was in the mind of the First Minister, or whether the First Minister was acting as a First Minister or a party leader. Our evidence to date was that this was a party discussion, that the apology which was referred to in the documentation was the drafts that we have received, which, as Mickey Brady said, were redacted. That in all the drafts that I've read, that there is a clear argument that there was one item for discussion during a telephone conversation. So first of all, I just don't want people to try to be speculating on behalf of the First Minister. It's not our role to do that. But secondly, more importantly, I am not aware, as the chair of this inquiry, I am not aware of any legal basis upon which you would say that that's internal party business, so I can't discuss that. I'm just advising you of that. There's no indication of any legal basis for that. You still have your legal rights as to whether or not you want to answer questions. I just want to advise you that it's not my understanding that you have any reliance legally on the issue that it's a party business. So you need to understand when you're giving your evidence to the committee. The committee will draw its conclusions on the basis of the evidence that it hears in and around and in its totality by omission or by inclusion. Just want to remind you of that formally. Okay, so
I think that the point that I was making, Chair, was that it would be a reasonable assumption that Mr Robinson would issue a statement based on evidence that was available to him. I presume that would mean the case in any statement that he would issue, that it would be based, particularly in relation to something like this, because it was a meeting which involved myself, I think, and Jenny Palmer, Jeffrey Donaldson was there, Gavin Robinson, I think, was taking notes. So it would have been a situation where, having listened to the evidence, then Mr Robinson would have issued a statement based on that evidence.
And I can only imagine that's why there are a number of drafts, as that was further clarified.
That's fine, thank you.
But the fifth draft does not make mention of the fact there's only one issue mentioned, is that right?
Well, I suppose the question begs the question then, why were there five drafts? Not an unreasonable question in the
I
circumstances.
think the record will show that it actually does remain in the fifth draft.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's twice you've drawn. You've actually suggested that the draft changed. And to leave a point out for record that that's not true, do you accept that?
But if I could have the drafts, that would be useful if that was possible.
Does he send it? They were issued to you, I understand. Were they issued?
Yeah. Yesterday they were emailed to me, yeah, but if you had a hard copy, I'd appreciate it. If you
You've had a chance to look at them?
Yes, yesterday I got them, yeah.
Okay, so you've said twice here that you basically suggested there on two occasions this morning already that the draft's changed. Martin United accepted that's not the case.
And if you, again, this is a party draft release. And if you look at that line, I mean, I can't tell you what the rest of that line says on the fifth draft. Both were agreed that the only issue discussed during the conversation was the board's consideration of the contractor Red Sky. It doesn't show what follows on the rest of that line.
Chair, can I just say...
Sorry, but you can confirm what is in it. You accept the record of what is in it, states clearly. So there's one item for discussion.
Chairman, these were internal draft exchanges between a number of parties that as yet haven't reached a conclusion.
I'm aware of that.
Right.
I'm aware of that.
And so
And I've advised Mr Brimstone that I'm not aware of any legal basis upon which he can say that that's internal party business and therefore I can't discuss it. Just have to advise him that he's still within his rights not to answer any question. He's aware of that. But I can't accept people giving inaccurate evidence to the committee either, as you would expect me not to do so. So I'm simply, for the record, trying to have Mr Brimstone establish that what is in the document states very clearly.
But Chairman, these
That's
are a
all.
series of documents that have not reached a conclusion as
I'm
yet.
only drawing attention informally for the record, making sure that people accept and understand that what's in all of those is exactly the same.
You will accept, Chair, that line on the fifth draft. I think it's the fifth draft, is it? We can't see it's been redacted, the final part of that fifth line.
But it's up to you. I mean, you're telling us if you don't want to discuss internal party business, your opportunity to reject what is there in front of us or explain it, that's entirely down to you where you want to take that option. It's up to you. I'm simply saying there's no legal basis upon which you can stand behind the fact that it's party business, but you can answer or not answer as you decide.
Yes, but I was more answering the question around the document in front of me and how it was different from the previous drafts.
Yeah, I'm just advising you that because
Yeah.
the committee has to, as I've said to you earlier on, Stephen, the committee has to deliberate on this in due course. And if you're saying you can't discuss it, then if I'm reading that evidence, I have to read what I see in front of me.
Yeah,
Unless someone tells me it's different.
yeah, and you can
or how it's
recognise
different.
the final part of that line has been redacted.
Yeah, but I'm reading what I'm reading,
Yeah,
which is quite clear to me.
yeah, but you can see this
Nothing
final
was
part.
Inconclusive set of documents.
There's nothing which contradicts the wording in that series of drafts. That's the only point I'm making. I'm not going to labour it any further. So, Mickey Brady, you were
That's fine.
okay. Tim Mollister.
So, what are your objections to the content of the Spotlight programme?
Is this a point of a conflicting evidence or clarity around conflicting evidence?
Very straightforward
In a
question.
previous evidence session that I gave.
Very straightforward question. What's your points of objection to the content of the Spotlight programme? If you have any, tell us what they are.
Sure I had, whether I can give a definitive list to this committee here today or not.
Well, let's try.
I think through my answers I have given where I...
This is you now giving evidence under affirmation. I am asking you to tell us what your objections are to the content of the Spotlight programme.
And I'm not in a position to give that today in its entirety. I mean, if I was aware of such a question was going to come, I would have prepared along those lines. I can't give it, under affirmation, I can't give a definitive...
Can you tell us anything you object to in the programme?
Well, I think it's clear that I object to Councillor Palmer's recollection of the phone conversation.
You telling her it's party comes first, do what you're told, this is what we require you to do, etc.
Yes,
You object to that?
yes.
Anything else?
I think that was the main point regarding myself at this point.
And did you think that that defamed you?
I'm not a legal advisor. I have no qualifications in that regard, so I can't answer that question.
Well, you certainly threatened legal proceedings, isn't that right?
Potential proceedings, yes.
Did you ever take them?
No, if we go back to the previous evidence session that we had, I made that point clear.
So, whatever your objections were to the content of the programme, they weren't such that it motivated you to initiate any legal proceedings. Is that fair?
Well, I haven't initiated any legal proceedings.
Yes. And is that because what Mrs. Palmer was saying was true, and you knew it to be true?
No.
Then why would a man sit back and let himself be lied about and do nothing about it?
Well, I act under advice at all times. I've tried to give a defence at this committee. I gave a defence to the Spotlight programme. That is my defence.
And your defence was such that you didn't have the confidence of launching into legal proceedings to challenge that which you say or seem to suggest is untrue.
As I said before, I act under advice.
I'm suggesting to you that there's a fairly clear indication of you knowing in your heart of hearts that what the lady said was true.
No, I don't accept that.
You are aware that she, on evidence under oath, continues to be very clear about the content of that phone call.
Yes.
And we now know that she told the same account, not just to Spotlight, but to the DFP inquiry.
So it appears, yes.
Are you prepared to share what you told the DFP inquiry?
No, I'm afraid, apologies, but it's a matter of personnel, the fact-finding exercise, and I'm not in a position to comment on that.
The ultimate outcome might be a personnel matter, but it suggests that the collection of facts is exactly that, fact-finding matter touching solely upon the facts that this committee is seeking to get to the bottom of. But you don't wish to share that with us.
I'm not in a position to share details pertaining to the fact-finding exercise of this committee.
Well, you're in a position if you wish. You don't wish. Isn't that correct?
I reiterate my previous answer, Chair. Apologies.
Now, on this point that Mr. Brady asked you about the Minister having told the View, first of all, that you didn't make the phone call at his behest, and then that he didn't know he'd made the phone call. You knew the Minister had told the View that?
Yes.
Yes. So before the Minister came to give evidence to this committee, knowing what you knew what your evidence was going to be, did you have a discussion with the Minister? Well, how are we going to handle the fact that you told the View that it wasn't made at my behest, at his behest, and he didn't even know about it?
I'm clear on my actions throughout all of this, and I've given that as best as I can. The Minister clearly felt that he had, in hindsight, after the programme, been in part of discussions before the phone call and was aware of it after as well.
Yes, but I was asking you, had you any discussion with the Minister before he came to give evidence about how to handle this conflict?
I can't recall any particular discussion regarding
Any particular discussion? What does that mean?
Chair, I don't
Whether you
know.
had a discussion or you had not.
That's not clear. I'm trying to answer as best I can. I don't recall any particular discussion.
So can you offer, and you might well say, well, ask Mr. McCausland, but have you any light to shed on how the Minister came to tell the View one thing and this committee another?
It will be a matter for Mr. McCausland.
And you've had no discussions that would shed any light on that?
As I previously answered, yeah.
You would agree they're entirely contradictory?
That's a matter for this committee.
Now, In terms of the draft apologies that you were asked about, and this salient point that in all of those we've seen, there is this unambiguous statement that both you and Mrs. Palmer were agreed the only issue discussed during the conversation was the board's consideration of the contractor Red Sky. Is that correct?
I'm not getting into matters relating to the internal party discussion.
Sorry, why not?
I'm not sure I have to answer that question, Chair. I've said,
Well,
Well, Mr.
you don't have to answer the question, but it's a fair question.
yeah.
But having said that he didn't want to, Chairman,
Well, but just let me know.
Right, just a wee second. I mean, the evidence, the witness at all times is, and within his rights, not to answer any question. But that's not to suggest that he's not obliged to hear some questions. And he may decide to answer them whatever way you decide to do that.
You're not obliged to hear the same question 6 times.
And I will allow that on a number of occasions. I will not allow that to be overstated, and I've done that repeatedly. I've stopped people asking the same question on a number of occasions, but I think it's fair that the questions are put. The witness is obliged to hear questions. He'll answer them whatever way he chooses, and the committee will draw its conclusions on the basis of that.
Mr. Brimstone, you remember 20 minutes ago taking an affirmation at the start of your evidence?
Yes, I do.
You remember uttering the words as part of that affirmation, "I will give the committee all such information and assistance as I can."
Yes.
And here we are 20 minutes later, you refusing to give the committee information on this matter. How do you square that with your affirmation?
Well, I don't believe that I can share matters
Why
of
not?
internal party matter.
Why not? You can tell us. You're choosing not to tell us. And your affirmation was that I will give the committee all such information and assistance as I can.
And I don't believe I'm in a position to share internal party matters with this committee.
So
Chairman,
you're happy to breach your affirmation?
Chairman,
Sorry, so hold
he
on.
has made it quite clear, and you've pointed out he is entitled to decide if he is going to answer a particular question or he is not. Now, this bullying.
Here we go again.
Another
Yeah,
distraction.
well,
Buying
that's what
time
he-
for the
Hold
witness.
on,
Well, that's what
gentlemen.
he's
Hold
This is
on.
buying time for the
Gentlemen,
witness.
hold on a
That's
second.
what he's
It's a well-tried
Gentlemen,
tactic.
hold on a
Mr.
second.
It's not buying. It's not
Excuse
buying
me,
time
Sammy
for the
Wilson.
witness. It's making
Sammy
sure
Wilson,
he
be
doesn't
quiet for a
act like
moment.
he's some-
Sammy, just hold on a second. We're not going to allow this to degenerate. As I've said here before, won't accept the kind of disruption we're going to likely to get here today. Hopefully it will not happen. It won't happen again. If it does happen, you know what the result will likely be. But that will not
let's
buy
not go down
time.
that route, Chairman.
We will go down whatever route
No,
I decide
let
to
us
do
not
so,
go down
as
that
you well
route.
know, Mr. Campbell.
No, it
So
will not
we
go
will
down
do
that route. And if it does, Chairman, go down this route, as I have said before, there will be very serious consequences
Fine.
for the future investigation by this committee into the inquiry.
That's your view, and you're
Threat?
to have your view.
No, it's not, it's not.
I
This
will-
is the 5th time
Excuse me,
this witness has
gentlemen,
been
just
before
hold on
the
a second,
committee.
Mr. Campbell. You're subject, like the rest of us around this table, to the procedures which govern
And I'm quite happy to
conduct of
abide
this
by them.
committee and inquiry, and you will abide by them.
Yes, and I've always
You
done
will.
so as well.
So therefore, I make it very clear, so I want this to be conducted on a professional and orderly basis. If it's not, and people want to disrupt it, we have the option ultimately to suspend. I will have no hesitation in doing that, but want to make it also very clear that will not allow time for anybody to avoid dealing with questions. People may wish to not answer a question, or they'll answer them in a way in which they're legally entitled to do, but they will still face the questions. And
There
that's what
should
will
be
happen.
no
Whether
admission
we,
of failure by any chair by
that's
adjourning the
your,
discussions.
if you wish to
That is an
disrupt,
admission of failure.
if you wish to disrupt the business of this
Whether Mr.
inquiry,
Allister
I
would
will
like to
conduct it.
prolong this even
Mr.
further
Campbell,
and
Mr.
get a
Campbell,
sick bite at the
Mr.
chair.
Campbell, I advise you to be orderly.
I'm
Advise you to
orderly
be
at all
orderly.
times,
Well,
Chairman.
this meeting will suspend, and I will do that
I'm
very
orderly
quickly.
at all
And I've
times.
already given notice, and given notice now. If it continues, it will happen. Sorry, Fra McCann. Fra McCann, please,
Be
just
ordered.
remain silent at the moment. We'll get this back on track again. Okay, so just making it very clear, push come to shove, further disruptions, I will suspend the business of the committee and the inquiry.
Take the consequences then.
Yeah, and there will be consequences.
there should
And
be.
that consequence is a lack of public confidence in the conduct of members of this committee, and the failure of this inquiry to do this business
lack
in
of
an
confidence in
expeditious
your
time.
chairmanship of
Well,
audit.
people will decide on that, and I think if it's decided already, Fra, please no further intervention. So I want to move back on to the evidence. I've said from day one, I'm allowing members to pose a number of questions. If other members want to ask questions, indicate to me that they wish to do so, and I'll bring them in a timely fashion. At this moment in time, Jim Oliver has the floor. Jim, just again remind people that I will allow people to pose questions. Witnesses may decide not to answer a question, but they are obliged to hear the questions. I will allow a number of questions put on a number of occasions. I will not allow them to be made repeatedly when it's quite clear the witness has made his decision. But I remind the witness that the committee will make its judgment on the basis of the evidence it hears from the witness and other witnesses. So, this is your opportunity to clarify issues which clearly, in terms of the evidence presented to this committee, are quite contradictory and quite starkly so. So I'm allowing members to ask questions. I will stop members asking a question repeatedly if it goes on for too long. Jim.
Mr. Brimstone, you've had 5 minutes, courtesy of that interruption, to reflect upon the affirmation you took that you would give the committee all such information and assistance as you can. Having had that opportunity to reflect, do you wish to help this committee by telling us if that repeated declaration in the 5 drafts that both were agreed the only issue discussed during the conversation was the board's consideration of the contractor Red Sky? Or you wish to take the opportunity to tell us if that's the truth?
I'm not prepared to answer internal party-related matters, questions relating to internal party-related matters.
You put that above your affirmation.
I've answered the question, Chair.
Mrs. Palmer told us that the genesis of this attempted apology went through 5 drafts, which was mutually provided to you and to her. Is that correct?
I'm not prepared to answer questions relating to internal party matters.
And that you had the opportunity on each of those occasions to amend and to change that which appeared in the respective drafts. Is that correct?
Again, I refer to my previous answer.
And that you significantly failed to take that opportunity to write out, to take out the affirmation that both were agreed that the only issue discussed was the contractor Red Sky. Is that correct? 5 times you failed to take it out.
And I refer to my previous answer.
And 5 times you failed to take it out, I suggest to you, because it is the truth. Is that right?
Sorry, I refer to my previous answer.
And that there wasn't discussion such as you previously told us about VUA maintain or anything else. It was about Red Sky.
I've given my outline of the phone conversation in my evidence on the 16th of October, page 3. That is my recollection of the phone conversation, and I stand by that.
If that was correct, why wouldn't you then take the 5-fold opportunity to change the draft to put that in?
And I refer to my previous answer.
Chairman, is Mr. Alistair hard of hearing,
Mr. Alistair is asking questions which he's entitled to ask, and I've
which is now
already,
asked 6 times?
I've already made a ruling on
Quick
that.
questions.
The witness can answer or not, and he's given his answers, and the committee will duly note the answers and take cognizance of the weight of the answers.
And they'll note the
against
questions as
evidence
well, I hope.
presented. Absolutely. And you'd be, of course, a member of the committee involved in that assessment of the evidence.
Yeah.
You said, Mr. Brimstone, you said to Mr. Brady that there are parts of this redacted, you don't know what's there. You have the original drafts that were sent to you, do you not?
I'm not prepared to comment on internal party matters.
But you're prepared to suggest to this committee, oh, mystery of mysteries, there's matters redacted. And this committee knows from evidence already given under oath that you, like Mrs. Palmer, were sent these very documents in their unredacted form. So you do know what has been redacted.
I'm not prepared to answer questions written in internal party matters.
I did suggest to you early on, Stephen, just for the record again, I did suggest to you early on that when you did suggest, which is why I intervened, that when you did suggest that by way of redaction, that the assertion made by Mrs. Palmer was actually inaccurate.
Well, it's just a point.
That's why I drew to your attention that in all of the copies, that same assertions are in black and white. I'm just drawing that to attention.
I was just making the point, Chair, with
So,
regard to your
The
assertion.
point I'm making is you were straying into what I would suggest, giving an explanation about the draft document, but otherwise, from that one intervention, you've been saying you're not prepared to discuss it. I'm just making that point.
If I can clarify that, Chair, I'm just clarifying the point, Chair, that the line you referred to in the 5th version of this draft is clearly redacted, and we can't read what the remainder of that line says. That was the point I was making at the start, Chair.
But you're not in a position to give an explanation to the inquiry to contradict the words that we have in front of us. That's all I'm saying to you. You need to understand that.
Yeah, the partial sentence that you have in front of you, yeah.
But what's there is there in front of us. There's nothing by way of you've said to contradict that.
That's
But
correct.
we have to consider that
That's correct, yeah.
in our evidence assessment.
And I'm suggesting to you, you know full well what has been redacted, because some of them are your handiwork.
And again, Chair, I'm not in a position to answer questions of an internal party matter.
Well, you are in a position, but you won't.
Which is said in
Okay,
numerous.
so that
Now,
ends.
let me ask you this.
I mean, I'm allowed
Have you
Tim-
yet recalled...
Tim, just a second. I've allowed a range of questions there.
Yeah, I'm finished with that point.
Okay.
I think hearing aids should be supplied to
Okay.
them.
Okay, we'll just proceed, Jim.
I think Mr. Campbell only lets himself down. Comments.
Can't supply them.
I said earlier on, the conduct of this.
There are a lot of people, and this committee knows it full well, dealing with people with great disabilities, afflicted with hearing loss, and to have a trite comment made like that by Mr. Campbell
Don't try
reflects
and
very
shift the
poorly
emphasis,
upon him.
Dennis. Don't
Well, I was
try
just-
and
Very
shift the
poorly.
emphasis.
Let me just remind members again that this is an inquiry in public
Then
session.
hole stop digging.
Mr.
Jim.
Campbell,
Indeed.
Mr. Campbell, I'm speaking. Mr. Campbell, I'm speaking from the position of the chair. Okay, no further intervention at this stage again. So I'm making it very clear that this is in public session. The general public will have made their mind up or will make their mind up on the conduct and behaviour of members. So I would advise members to remind themselves of that. There already has been a fair amount of public commentary around the nature of this inquiry on more than one occasion. And that's not something I think it does this committee or any member around this table a service. So let's stick to what our statutory obligations are in a responsible and professional manner. So, Jim.
Mr. Brimstone, have you yet been able to remember where you were when you made the phone call to Mrs. Palmer?
No, I wasn't in a position to answer that question clearly on the 13th of November, and I'm not today. I can't recall exactly where I was when I made the phone call. No,
Can you recall who was with you?
no, I assumed I was on my own, but
Can you recall going back and discussing it with the minister?
yes, that was the general course of events for such a phone call, yeah.
And can you recall how soon you did that?
It would have likely been shortly after the phone call, as I stated in the 13th of November on page 6 of the evidence.
Can you recall if the minister was awaiting the outcome of that phone call?
I'm not sure that question was asked me before. You said if I
It may not, but I'm asking it now. Do you recall if the minister was awaiting for you to come back to him about the outcome of the phone call?
No, well, I'm assuming at some point he would have expected the phone call to have taken place and for him to be given a readout on the phone conversation.
Did you report the phone call to anyone else?
Not that I can recall, no.
In terms of the email that was sent on the 5th of July, Mr. Sands has been very emphatic to this committee that came about by you coming to his room at 7:30 on the morning of the 5th of July 2011 and asking him to send it. Your evidence previously has been, well, it's been somewhat varied between you can't recall or that you didn't go to his room. In light of what Mr. Sands has told us under oath or under affirmation, what do you now say about how it came about that that email was sent when it was sent?
I go back to my earlier evidence, and still I cannot recall the precise conversation with Mr. Sands, and I still hold the view that I can only remember on one occasion being in the Lighthouse building at that time of the morning, and it wasn't on that occasion.
So are you saying to us under affirmation that you didn't go to his room that morning?
No, that's not what I said. I said that I cannot recall a conversation with Mr. Sands, and I cannot recall any other occasion except one when I was in the Lighthouse building at that time of the morning.
Well, you're not suggesting to us, I take it, that Mr. Sands of his own volition sent this email?
I never suggested that.
No. You are accepting, I take it, that the genesis of the email is an instruction or a request from you?
Well, let's just read the email, just for clarity here. And if you don't mind, Chair, I'll read it onto the record. So it's from Michael Sands, sent on the 5th of July at 7:40 a.m. to Maria McLaughlin, CC'd to Stuart Cuddy, the Acting Chief Executive of the Housing Executive, and Jim Wilkinson, the Director of Housing and the Department for Social Development. It reads, Brian, Minister Spad thinks that 6 months is too long a time frame for continuation by the Red Sky Administrator. Our advice from CPD is 91 days, open parentheses, i.e. under the EU limit, close parentheses, to complete the tender exercise once all paperwork is prepared. So if we allowed to the end of the month for paperwork, comma, say 1 month plus 3 for the tender exercise equals 4 months in total, could the question re 4 months be put to BDO as below rather than 6? Regards, Michael.
And?
My conversation with Mr. Sands, looking at this email, was around the fact that I felt that 6 months was too long a time frame, taking into consideration the CPD advice around the 91 days. I cannot see any instruction there at all.
When I said instruction, I used it in the context of the instruction to send the email.
Well, I don't know whether there was how I can give an instruction. I'm unclear. I well could understand a conversation taking place, and I accept that a conversation took place that instigated this email. But whether that's an instruction or whether it's a follow-on from the discussion.
Let's take the word instruction out of it, if you don't like that. Do you accept that this email was sent not by Mr. Sands of his own volition, but upon request from you?
No, I don't think we can read that into this email at all.
Well, never mind what we can read into the email. Giving your evidence from your memory,
Yep.
was this email sent at your request?
I can't answer that question. All I can say, reading the email here, that was clear that we had a discussion around the fact that I, as Special Advisor, felt that the 6 months time frame was too long. And that was clearly in around some discussion that had been had around the Centre Procurement Directorate advice of 91 days.
Are you suggesting to this committee that Mr. Sands, of his own volition, then decided at 7:30 in the morning, oh, I'd better email the Housing Executive and tell them the latest thinking that I picked up from somewhere of Mr. Brimstone?
Well, no, we emailed the Housing Executive asking if a question could be put to the Administrator
Yes.
of a reduction.
At your behest, Mr. Brimstone.
You can read that into it. I don't read that into it.
Well, that's very clearly the evidence to this committee from Mr. Sands. At your request, with you standing in his room.
And I'm reading the email. As I said, I can't recall the conversation.
You take great refuge in not being able to recall things.
It's 3.5 years ago, Mr. Alistair.
It's 3.5 years ago about incidents which have been hardly out of your mind, I would suggest, in those 3.5 years, given the notoriety that is attached to this matter.
I've given my answer as best as I can.
So what are we to conclude? That you didn't know the email was going? You did know the email was going? What are we to conclude on that?
Well, I think it's safe to conclude that I would have been aware that the Housing Executive would be asked.
At your request?
Well, whether at my request or following a discussion and mutual understanding or mutual agreement, this was the appropriate way forward, that the Housing Executive would be asked if, based on the CPD advice, it would be more appropriate to look for 4 months as opposed to 6 months.
So are you or are you not accepting that that email went at your request?
No, I can't, on the basis of that email, accept that.
So does that drive us to conclude it went from Mr. Sands at his own volition?
No, people can have a conversation.
Where's the middle ground?
Well, the middle ground is that people can have a conversation. And it may not have been just Mr. Sands and myself. I can't answer that question. People can have a conversation, and the outcome of that conversation, which may well have been instigated, the conversation may well have been instigated by myself. The outcome of that is an agreed way forward.
So you're leaving the committee in limbo with a very clear, confirmed evidence of Mr. Sands that it's a request from you standing in his room to send this email, and the very email cites you, that evidence, and you, as so often, saying, I can't really recall.
So if we look at the first line, Mr. Allister, it cites myself.
Yes.
Okay? The second line starts with the word "our." Okay? Not the SPAD's advice. It's our advice. Now, I put the question to you as who do you think the "our" includes?
Well, I think Mr. Brimstone says you are the minister's advisor, and this, I assume, is the product, and I'll come back to that, of discussion with the minister, because I think you told us you wouldn't have done this on your own. That the "our" referred to is either the department or the minister or both.
And who's the email from?
It's from a housing officer in the department.
Who's saying "our advice"?
Our advice, the department's advice.
Yes, thank you.
And isn't that because you didn't require, or did you require this email to go without the knowledge of the minister?
How are you reading that into?
Well, I'm asking you. Was the minister aware that this email was going to be sent
I would
at
imagine.
7:30 in the morning?
Well, I'm
He
sure-
may not have known the time, but it was going to be sent to the Housing Executive Board.
Well, the Minister may not have known a particular email was going to be sent. The Minister, I would have assumed, would have been aware that the Housing Executive would have been asked, was 4 months more appropriate time frame based on the CPT advice as opposed to 6 months as had been in his original letter.
And he would have known that on foot off. Your discussions with the minister and giving advice to the minister as to the fact, well, maybe 6 months, which you had asked for, having previously asked for 6 weeks, maybe in fact the right figure is 4 months. You must have had that discussion at some point with the minister.
Well, I'm sure it was more than just myself. I'm sure officials
Yes.
were involved in that
Yes.
discussion as well.
Yes. And on foot of that, an email is then sent to the Housing Executive,
Yes.
citing you.
Yep. My opinion, yes.
And I want to suggest to you, all that points very emphatically, in accordance with Mr. Sands' evidence, to you issuing the request that it go with the knowledge of the minister, I assume.
That a particular email goes or that a request is made.
That request be conveyed before the board meets.
Yeah, I'm assuming the Minister would have been aware
Yes.
that a request was going to be put to the Housing Executive or to the Administrator.
And you were the messenger to send that email, to Mr. Sands to send that email.
Well, I don't accept because I can't recall where I was when this conversation took place, nor can I recall who else was in the room when the conversation took place that instigated this email.
This email, of course, raised its head again. Isn't that right?
Yes, in the board minutes of July 2011.
Yes. And more than that, when Mrs. Palmer gave evidence to the DFP fact-finding investigation, she made very express reference to the existence of this email. Isn't that right?
I have a recollection that came up, yes, from the evidence I seen earlier on in the week, yes.
Yes. And that would have been put to you as part of the fact-finding exercise. What did you say about that?
I think I've been clear to the committee around any answers to questions relating to the fact-finding exercise, and again, as State Chair, I'm unfortunately not in a position to answer such
You're
questions.
refusing to answer that question as well, despite your affirmation.
I am not in a position to answer questions
So
relating
you're happy to leave the committee in the position, but the only evidence we have in that is from Mrs. Palmer.
evidence relating to what?
The fact that that was raised in the fact-finding inquiry, the issue of that email. You're not confirming or denying whether it was raised with you.
Correct.
I'm suggesting to you, if it was a proper fact-finding inquiry, that having been an allegation of Mrs. Palmer, it inevitably was raised with you.
And what's the allegation?
That you were involved in the sending of an email on the morning of the board meeting on the 5th of July, giving instructions.
Where is the instruction in the email?
Yes, you want to quibble again over that, that you were involved in the sending
No.
of an email
No, I'm
on the
not.
morning
No,
of the
I'm
5th
quibbling the fact of where is the instruction.
Yeah, well, I think it's fairly clear, conveying
Could you point out to me, Mr. Allen?
conveying to the board at your request that they wanted the board to consider an adjustment to what had previously been asked for in correspondence.
So where's the instruction?
Well, obviously, the request rather than
You
instruction.
you argued that I was instructing the House Executive to do something. So where is the instruction in that email?
Well, I think the import is that you're asking the Housing Executive to consider an alternative approach, including this 4-month extension. Now, if you quibble with that being an instruction, so be it. I'll accept if you wish that that's not an instruction. But the issue is the sending of the email and how the email came to be sent. And in the fact-finding inquiry, it had been drawn to the attention of the fact-finders that it had been sent by Mrs. Palmer, drew it to their attention. And I'm suggesting it inevitably then you were asked about it in the fact-finding inquiry. Were you not?
I've said I'm not prepared to answer.
Not
any
prepared to
questions
answer.
to the fact-finding exercise.
And then, with that knowledge that somewhere out there was this email, you then set about looking for it. Is that not correct?
Well, I first became aware of the email over a year before, 2 years before the fact-finding exercise.
Yes.
So I first became aware of the email in July, if not August, of 2011, not 2012 or 13, 2011.
See, I want to suggest to you that from the fact-finding exercise, you discovered about the email and then wanted to see this email and the words of what Mrs. Palmer says Michael Sands said to her. You were going mad looking for it.
And what's Michael Sands' evidence relating to those words?
He takes some dispute with that.
Some dispute.
But let's be very clear. Let's be very clear. The initial explanation by you and Mr. Sands was, why would I be going mad looking for it? Sure, it's on the system.
Chairman,
And now we know it's not on the system.
see if
Just a second, Jim.
we'll move on from this.
I'm going to, well, first of all, I'm going to...
Would you make it quite clear to anybody who's asking questions that they cannot, should not, and must not, in order to try and twist questions, misrepresent? Mr. Sands did not have some dispute or some query of this. Mr. Sands denied, full stop, outright, unequivocally, that what Mrs. Palmer said was not true, in fact, it was a lie.
That was in a
He
separate...
made that quite clear.
Well-
So don't let Mr. Sands' words be misrepresented in any question.
Well, don't...
Yeah, Mrs. Palmer, as far as he was concerned, lied on this issue.
That's okay. That was in respect of another particular piece of evidence provided by Mrs. Palmer, so nobody should be misrepresenting ourselves in the questions that we pose as well. So, Jim, we're going to let you finish that question and move on to our member. I want
Okay.
to just tease you out a couple, and I'll come back to you again.
Sure. So contrary to earlier evidence that this email would have been in the system, and therefore no one would need to be going mad looking for it, do you now accept that at that material time it was not in the system?
Which system?
Which system do you think I might be referring to?
Well, there's the email system, there's the TRIM system, there's the knowledge network system. With relation to the FOI, which I'm assuming you're getting around to, they searched the TRIM system for the particular email. But that email would have been available from Mr. Sands at any time from his sent items and his own personal email.
I don't think he told us that.
Well, anybody, I'm sure in your own
You
inbox.
know that? Is that how you found it?
Well, I'm assuming you have a sent items.
Is that how it was found, Mr. Brimstone?
Well, no, I'm assuming.
Is that how it was found?
What?
This missing email,
When?
which couldn't be found for FOI, and then suddenly in April of last year was found for this committee.
Well, I would
Is that
argue.
where it was found?
I would argue that the email, I was aware of the email in July, if not August, of 2011.
Yes, but Mr. Sands told us he didn't know how the email was found. Are you suggesting it was found in his sent box?
I can only assume it wasn't in the TRIM system. I think that was the evidence that was given.
It wasn't in any system that was searched for those 2 years.
Well, I'm not involved in that, so I don't know the process. But what I'm saying is the email was clearly there because the email was able to be pulled out here.
No, sorry, with respect, the email was not clearly there. Because what was it? This committee has been told is that a hard copy was eventually found. Not that it was found on a system, unless you're suggesting to us that the department has misled us.
Well,
But
no,
how this email was found.
I'm not.
What do you know about how it was
For the
found?
record, just for the record, we were advised that the email was deleted after 90 days, or it would have been deleted after 90, but
Yeah.
there was subsequently a hard copy. But your evidence there, you're just saying you were aware of the email or seen the email sometime before that. So,
And the month after it was sent. or whatever.
well, so, but we have been given evidence that there's no sight of the email. That's in evidence that
Where
you.
did you see it the month after it was sent?
Well, I'm assuming after reading the minutes of the board minute of the Housing Executive,
Yes.
where this email was referred to,
Yes.
that I may have asked, and I don't recall ever doing this, by the way, but I may have asked to have seen it. It would have followed on
Why would you
naturally.
do that?
Because the chairman had made an accusation about an instruction given by the political advisor, I think was how he referred to me, in the board minutes.
So did you get a copy of it at that point?
Well, the board minutes are available in the
No, did you get a copy of the email at that point?
I can't recall if I actually, whether it was a hard copy or an electronic copy or whatever, but
Was it your hard copy that was eventually found and handed over to this committee?
No,
Mr. Brimstone?
no, it wasn't.
It having been expunged from the record, is that the case?
No, it's not. I think you know that fine well.
Well, I don't.
I think you do.
Well, how would I? All this committee knows is it wasn't on the records in email form, and suddenly, mysteriously, a hard copy is whipped out and produced.
I think that
Was that your hard copy?
No, it wasn't.
Whose hard copy was it?
I don't know. You can ask the department whose hard copy it was, but it wasn't mine.
But you would have us believe that you saw this email on the system a month after it was sent?
Whether it was on the system or whether it was a hard copy or what, but I would have been.
So you want to change your evidence in that?
No, I don't think so.
It was now maybe a hard copy you saw?
Well, I said that at the start. It may well
Well,
have been
no,
a hard
no.
copy.
You were talking about it on the system, and I said, did you get it printed out to make it a hard copy?
No, I don't
And you
think
said, I can't recall.
No, I don't
So the discussion was very much on the basis of it being within the system.
Well, we'll have to wait till Hansard comes out. But
And I think the
don't-
Hansard will show that that question wasn't
Okay,
asked.
well, I mean, I'm going to refer to Hansard in a moment or two, because I'm going to draw attention to some remarks made a few minutes ago. So, Tim, I'm going to move on to, before bringing Dolores, I want to just, Stephen, to tease out a couple of points here, because in your evidence in respect of the email sent by Michael Sands, he was very clear in his evidence to the committee that in no way would he have issued that email on his own volition. That the email was issued by himself following a conversation with you in his office at 7:30-ish in the morning. in your presentation of that, you're saying, the first instance, you don't recall being in the office. There was certainly no instruction by yourself to Mr. Sanchez through the email. Drawing to your attention a couple of things here. That Michael Sands is adamant that there's no way would he have sent that unless he had been advised or directed.
And I'm not arguing that.
Well, I'm just making a point because I think if you look back on your remarks around that, I would suggest, if I was not aware of other things I read here, it would almost appear to be like a neutral intervention by yourself.
Well, no,
So,
I don't. I'm sorry, if that's the case, then that's incorrect, and it's my failure if that is the case. Clearly there was a conversation that was had. Clearly I had a view that this potentially 6 months was too long. There clearly had been some discussion around the fact that CPD had given advice around the 91 days. And this is where this email eventually came out, but it was after a discussion. Where that discussion took place, at what time, even on what day, I can't answer.
but, and that's fair enough, thank you for that. And further to that, in terms of who was the R, and I would draw your attention to evidence presented to the inquiry by Will Hare, who, in his evidence, said that the key point for him was that, quotation, I did not understand why this request had gone in the process, that is the request around the 4 month. And then I would draw to your attention evidence from Michael Jennings, the administrator, on behalf of the administrator, who had said that you had made a phone call to them looking for essentially a comfort letter. So that would be in.
What? Could you just read the words that Michael Jennings actually used?
We'll get that in a second. But because what I'm actually suggesting to yourself, Stephen, is that there was a lot more proactivity on your behalf than what may have been suggested by your evidence earlier on.
In relation to this email?
Yeah.
But the email and the
issue.
Michael Jennings
On the issue, because remember, it may be two separate issues, but it's on the 28th of June, which is just a number of days in advance of the email. So I'm making a point that the evidence that we would have received would show that it wasn't the casual, but in a way you partly addressed that a moment ago. I'm saying is that if I was not aware of all of this, listen to you early on, I would almost have come across as it was a neutral intervention. But you made it clear it's not. So you did indicate the discussion which resulted in an email to the Housing Executive.
But if it was just with him, I can't be certain, but clearly I had a view and he was articulating that view. And on the back of that view, CPD, whether on the back of that view or on the back of my query, CPD advice had been sought, I don't know. But clearly CPD advice was sought and provided.
And do you accept Michael Sands' evidence that in no way would he have issued the email on his own volition?
Without that conversation, who all was in that conversation, I don't know. But without that conversation, except Michael likely wouldn't have issued that email.
You're aware he said it was he and yourself in the conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just drawing that attention.
Chair, you can accept if I can't recall the conversation, I can't recall the conversation. And that's not arguing against Michael. But if I can't recall the conversation, I can't come to this committee and say
But again, I'm just reminding you that whenever I have to come to like every other member around this table, I have to come to assess evidence. I have to give due weight to what somebody tells me very clearly and what somebody else doesn't contradict by way of saying they can't recall. So I'm reminding you repeatedly that that's the upshot of it. Dolores,
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points of clarification. On more than one instance, Mr Brimstone, you've relied upon internal party matter and therefore are unable to answer some of the questions that were put to you. Can I ask, are you under instruction from anyone else within your party to give that, or is this something you've taken upon yourself as an interpretation of how you should respond to the inquiry's questions?
I can't comment on any internal party matter.
So you're not even going to tell me whether you've been instructed to do this or not?
Well, in my view, that would be commenting on an internal party matter.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one, in terms of the latter bit, in essence, in relation to the alleged meeting at 7:30 a.m. between yourself and Mr Sands in his office, you're really saying that you're neither confirming nor denying that somebody have no recollection?
It's more than that, actually, Dolores. Okay. What I said in the previous evidence was I genuinely can recall only one instance when I was in the office at that time of the morning. I don't live in Belfast. So for me to be in the office at 7:30 in the morning or before that, as I'm assuming it would have taken Michael some time to write up the email. Short and all as it is, but it just likely didn't happen. I can only recall one instance when I was in the office between 7 and 7:20 or 7:30 a.m. And that's one instance separate to this.
So therefore, a 7:30 a.m. meeting was and is a rare occasion. And I think it's safe to assume that if there was such a meeting at 7:30 in the morning, people would remember why they were there.
Well, I know Michael is in early in the morning. I mean, there's some people in the office who are in early, but that's the way they choose to work. I mean, I don't think he said it was a meeting that took place. He said it was a conversation. But I'm just giving you my best recollection. I cannot recall any other instance other than the one I gave at the last evidence session when I was in at that time of the morning.
Okay, can I then ask, given that in previous testimony to the committee as part of the overall inquiry, the Minister has changed some of the evidence really about whether or not he had asked you to phone Jenny Palmer, you know that. So what I'm trying to ask now is if you had the conversation with Mr Sands to issue that email, and you have already said in previous evidence that you have no powers to instruct a civil servant, were you then acting, or would you have been acting only on behalf of the Minister with his full support and indeed his instruction to do so?
Quite often in my role as special advisor within a department is seeking information. And I don't go to the Minister every time I seek information. And as part of the role is delving for information and asking questions. And that can be directed to an individual or having discussion with officials, and on the back of that further questions are asked. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I mean...
So sometimes you'd be acting of your own volition?
Seeking information, yeah.
Yeah. But given that the board of the Housing Executive had some concerns that the proposed extension of the contract may be outside current legal processes, would you have had any conversation with anyone as to whether or not the request and the content of the email was outside of legal processes, and had you sought any legal advice in relation to this particular methodology in relation to the Red Sky contract?
So was the Housing, and I'm just putting this back because I need to get clarification, was the Housing Executive's concern around potential legal issues around the content of that email or about wider issues?
Probably both.
Well,
But I mean, that's up to the Housing Executive.
Yeah, but I'm just
in this
reading-
particular instance, I think it is the current legal process that this request or instruction contained within the email was actually outside of a legal process.
So if we again go back to the email itself, and I'm looking for the only request there is, and it's not even a request, it's asking, could the question be put to the administrator about 4 months as opposed to 6 months?
But where I'm...
That may well have been an answer back from the Housing Executive saying, no, that question can't be put. So I'm unsure as to how there's a breach of any legal...
Well, the Housing Executive obviously had concerns that there would be any legal process. So before any instruction was given or request made to send this email, was there any legal advice sought by you or the Minister as to whether or not the proposed course of action was legal?
Just so you can see there, the advice from the Central Procurement Director who deal with all that sort of thing for the civil service had been around the 91 days.
But would you have sought personally any legal advice or advice from the Central Procurement Unit in relation to this course of action?
The department would have done that.
You didn't personally?
No, well, reading that email, it was our advice, so it was from Michael, so it must
But you
be the
didn't?
department.
Yeah, you didn't.
Well, sorry, but again, Stephen, for the record, I mean, I'd advise you that Will Herr and his evidence made it clear that he was the right one. I mean, I'll just quote you, Will Herr, just saying, sorry, at some time I heard about the issue, which is the email. Whether it was that day or after the board met, I do not know when I heard it. I do not think that I was there at 7:30 a.m. This is Will Herr saying he wasn't at the meeting. However, the key point for me is that I did not understand why this request that we just referred to again had gone in the process. But the key issue was a letter from the Minister, as I say, we need to ask, and then it stopped at that point. So it was quite clear that Will Herr and his evidence said it would not have been the department which made that request. to extend the time for any number of months.
Oh, no, but I'm talking about the advice from CPD. And
Yeah, but
Laura's
no,
asked me
sorry, but
about...
you're preferring a suggestion that they are, may have been the department.
Yeah, but they
What
are...
I'm saying is the permanent secretary is making it clear in his evidence that it wouldn't have been the department. I'm
But
just
the
on it there.
R isn't relating to the request to ask the question. The R is relating to advice from CPD around a technical matter of procurement.
But you've just said in an answer to the Laura, sir, when you said earlier on there that they are, would have been perhaps the department.
Yes, in relation to
But
the
you're not
CPD
sure.
advice.
You're saying you're not sure.
In relation to the CPD advice.
Yeah.
Because that then would suggest that the department, I mean, Will Hurst suggesting that the department knew nothing about the email, and therefore who would have sought the advice was the CPD. So maybe nobody sought the advice.
Sorry,
from
Will
CPD.
Hurst's argument was that the minister had made a request on 6 months, and this new request went in for 4 months. And I'm making the point that when you read the evidence in Will Hurst, he's making it clear that the department did not initiate the email to, which was sent by.
But I've never argued that.
Well, you did a minute ago.
No, I argued the point that the advice, our advice from CPD, is departmental advice from CPD.
Well, okay, well, sure, we'll reflect on that, but I'm drawing attention
Yeah.
to what's the evidence presented by the permanent.
Yeah, and I think actually my written statement on the 16th of October, point 7, makes reference to that as well.
Sorry, then, could I ask then, obviously there's conflicting evidence being given by Councillor Palmer and Michael Sands in relation to the email, and I just wondered, in relation to any ongoing conversations you'd had with Mr Sands, either at the time or subsequent, say even in September 2013, did you have any conversations with Mr Sands in relation to the email outside of the requests by the FOI from the BBC?
No, I don't believe it did, no.
No. And how can you explain the different evidence and different understanding by Mr Sands, yourself, and indeed the ultimate recipients of the housing executive in relation to the authority and the sender of the email?
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the only difference between myself and Mr Sands is around a time and location of a conversation, and it's more he's adamant it happened a certain time and I have no recollection, and I go further than that. I don't think I was in the department at that time because I don't believe I was ever in the department except for one other occasion at that time. So that's the only difference between myself and Mr
But you're
Sands
accepting therefore that
with the email. But I can't understand, and it's a question you need to put to the housing executive, I can't understand their interpretation of the email or the chairman's interpretation of the email.
because you had no concerns that what you were requesting them to do fell outside of any legal process.
Well, I wasn't even requesting to do anything. The question that was coming in Mr Sands' his email was, could the question, as to the housing executive, could the question every 4 months be put to BDO as below rather than 6? So that would have been perfectly within the housing executive rights to come back and say, no, the question couldn't be put.
And you would have accepted that? Or the Minister would have accepted that?
I can't answer that question because it's hypothetical.
And just finally, Chair, the telephone call to Michael Jennings, can you shed any light on relation to the letter of comfort? Who instructed you or asked you to make that call to Michael Jennings, and what would your expectations of a letter of comfort look like or contained?
And again, I haven't got
Mr Jennings?
Mr Jennings, yes, sorry, thank you. I don't have his, but from what I can recall of his...
We'll get you the reference
Thank
then
you.
now. Just hold on to get the reference. Oh, yeah.
Take this home with me. Yeah. In all of this, it would have been key. So the Minister was seeking a certain course of events. Sorry, can I just 1 second? That's all right. The Minister was looking to extend the Red Sky contract beyond the time period at which the housing executive wanted to terminate it, to allow a piece of work to be conducted. But in all of that, Red Sky being now under administration, the administrator's been BDO. And all of that, none of this would have been possible if, and I can't recall the conversation with Mr. Jennings, but I'm assuming that the conversation with Mr. Jennings was to ascertain, if necessary, could a letter of comfort be issued to meet the terms of the company NHE contracts up to the 14th of July 2011. Because if they weren't in a position to be able to issue a letter of comfort to say, you know, as administrators, we are not able to run this company up until this date, then what Minister was saying just wasn't going to be doable.
And on whose behalf did you make the phone call?
Listen, I can't recall. It may have been off my own bat. I can't recall. I mean, he wasn't actually asked to do anything. He was asked if something was possible.
But the letter of comfort would have assisted the Minister in terms of the time frame.
He was asked, going on his evidence here, whether the administrators would be able to issue a letter of comfort. Not to issue a letter of comfort, it was more a clarification of would they be in a position. There may have been some conversation with the Housing Executive saying we would require a letter of comfort from the administrator if this was going to happen. I can't recall, but I'm just trying to be as...
And what would you have liked to have seen as the outcome of this letter of comfort? What would it have meant in relation to the resolution of the difference of opinion between the Housing Executive Board and the Minister?
And this is not related in any way to this email.
No.
Okay. So in essence, this would have been to clarify whether the administrator were able to provide comfort to the Housing Executive that if the Housing Executive were going to extend the contract up until the 14th of July, because there must have been some query as to whether they were even able to do it up until the 14th of July, whether the administrator was in a position to run the company up until that date. Otherwise, it would have been a fruitless exercise looking to keep a contract going to the 14th of July if the company weren't in a position, or the minister weren't in a position to keep the company operational.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, before we move on to Gregory, Stephen, would you accept that this is all in the context of very clear advice and arguments from the Housing Executive in particular, but also officials, that people were straying into contractual matters, legal and contractual matters, which were out with anyone else's responsibility, with the exception of the Housing Executive? Accept that, because there was a flurry of activity. The point I tried to make early on, whether it's a conversation with Michael Jennings, whether it's the email, whether it's other discussions around that period, there was a flurry of activity in and around that period when it was been made very clear from officials that they wanted to be allowed to deal with that in a contractual manner in the law, which would have been a matter for the Housing Executive.
I'm trying to find...
And anything beyond that they were seeing as interference, which is in essence the core of this inquiry.
Yeah, I'm trying to find... There was a... I don't have it at hand here at the moment. If you go to the briefing of the meeting that was held between yourself and Minister, I think it was early July 2011, that briefing from officials to the Minister clearly outlines the rationale and the reasoning and their views on all of this. And I don't have it to hand, unfortunately, Chair. I had it, but I can't put my hands on it now. But I think what I'm getting at, I think this clearly points that the Minister wasn't acting beyond his remit at all.
That's fair, I mean, that's your stating it, yeah.
Yeah, the lines to take at Annex A of that.
I mean, that's your statement, yeah. Wow. Okay, Gregory?
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Brimstone, there's obviously a very significant concentration today on the email trail, but maybe just to try and bring us back to the what I would argue very relevant issue of the overall context here. The programme appeared to infer that there was some sort of relationship between Red Sky and either minister or there were some form of discussions, debate, secret meetings going on with Red Sky. Had you any meetings or discussions with directors of Red Sky prior to the events that were contained in the programme?
No, and the only meeting that I have had or was involved with that had the former directors of Red Sky was the meeting that the Minister had with his officials with the East Belfast DUP MLAs. That was the only meeting I had with anyone relating to Red Sky.
Right, because at the time there was the meeting that you've alluded to, which was with DUP MLAs for East Belfast. There was a letter from the Alliance MP for East Belfast, and the common thread there appeared to be the concern for the jobs,
Yeah.
as well as the contractual work that Red Sky is carrying out in the area.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, did anybody make any accusation of unsavoury approaches or dealings between either you or someone on your behalf and Red Sky?
No, I remember the chairman of the committee at one point raising an issue around that start of July, that he was uncomfortable with the way this was perceived to be working out. That's the only. Obviously, there's a furore of all the street protests and blockades and that sort of thing around City Hall and executive meetings up here by the Red Sky employees.
But you see, the nub of this, Mr. Brimstone, is that for a long time now, there's been this sort of inference and insinuation that there's more to this than meets the eye. I've said in this committee before, I'll say it again today, nobody seems to be prepared to indicate what that might be. Now, you're saying you've had no approach. We haven't heard from anybody else that there's been any approach, other than what has been stated in the meeting between DUP MLAs and then the letter by the Alliance MP for the area. You've said there's nothing in terms of what you've done. Well, many times have you been before this committee now, Mr. Brimstone?
This is my fifth.
This is your fifth occasion.
Yep.
Now, it's just there was some reference publicly to your non-appearance. I think it was last week.
I wasn't available. It's unfortunate, but I just wasn't. I apologise to the committee for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you sent that apology in, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, on the Monday of that week, yeah.
Yeah. Are you aware of a tweet by a member of this committee about your absence last week?
Someone made me aware of that tweet, yes.
Right.
Reference to On the Runs and making some jocular reference to On the Runs.
Yes, that was from Mr. Alistair.
Yes.
And I had the tweet in front of me. OTR Brimstone. Stephen Brimstone was pulled out of his evidence session under oath before DSD committee on Thursday. Now not available. That would have been your fifth occasion here, if you had been able to come.
Yes.
Most of the OTRs were murderers and terrorists, Mr. Brimstone.
Yes.
How do you feel about being likened by Mr. Alistair to a murderer and a
No
terrorist?
such likening.
By someone who defended
Someone
murderers
who
and
was on
terrorists over the
Okay,
years, I don't
folks.
take it very
Stephen,
kindly.
sorry, a second, just a second. Okay. If you could make a point, Gregory, relevant to what we're doing here this morning, because
Yeah, it is.
you will appreciate that members around this table will occasionally make a number of statements, some of which we may agree with, some of which we may believe to be outlandish. So if we want to go down the road of checking what everybody has tweeted or said publicly, even within the room, then we need to be careful, because we'll be spending an awful lot longer in this inquiry than what we might want to intend to do. So,
Yeah, yeah, bear that in mind, Chairman. So, I take it you weren't overly happy about Mr. Alistair likening you to a murderer or a terrorist?
I did not liken him to a murderer or
the
terrorist.
record, I mean, I haven't read it.
Chairman, the tweets here, OTR Brimstone, unless...
On the run. That's
on
quite
the-
different.
On the run.
Okay,
and-
sorry.
Running
on the
away
run,
from this
gentlemen.
committee, running away from
Yes.
giving
Sorry,
evidence.
gentlemen.
Don't like it now, Mr.
Sorry,
Alistair, do you?
gentlemen. Sorry, gentlemen.
No.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. Just stick to the question, Jim. you've made it clear on the record, you didn't refer to it in that context, so let's take it
That's
that.
what the tweet said, but
That's
hey,
okay, so you've made your point,
Yeah.
and Jim's
And-
responded, and I want to move on from that
yeah,
point.
I'm finished with my questions, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jim, you were looking back in again?
Yes, it was briefly. The issue about
Jones would say,
the sending of the email and the Permanent Secretary's evidence to this committee. And he said in relation to the email, what I did not understand was why the request was made. The Minister's letter said 6 months. That was what the board was looking at, and I couldn't understand it. I infer from that the Permanent Secretary hadn't been told that the 6 months in the letter was going to be changed or being explored if it could be changed to 4 months, courtesy of the email. Is that fair? The Permanent Secretary was kept in the dark about this.
Well, the Permanent Secretary says he wasn't aware of it.
Yeah. Would there be an expectation that an adjustment of policy of that nature on such a controversial issue would be that the Permanent Secretary would be kept in the loop?
I'm surprised that he wasn't, to be honest.
You certainly didn't keep him in the loop.
No, but if you look at that email, not only was Michael Sands, the sender of the email, aware of it, Jim Wilkinson, the Director of Housing, was there.
But at what point did you tell the Permanent Secretary about that email?
I don't believe it ever any role to tell him about the email.
You didn't tell him?
Likely not, no.
Right, okay. And as you were asked, that was a follow-up to the inquiries you had been spearheading with the administrators of the 28th of June.
I had one phone call.
Yeah.
I think he referred to it as one brief.
And who did you say asked you to make that call?
Well, I didn't. I couldn't recall, and I said it
Couldn't
potentially-
recall. Or do you think you did it of your own volition?
Was potentially. I was seeking information.
Well, seeking information to what advantage?
As to whether the as to whether the administrator was able to run the company Red Sky under administration until the 14th of July or not.
Yes. And of course, you and the Minister were interested, in fact, in a longer period than that.
I don't know why the 14th of July was
Yeah.
in the conversation, but yes, we were interested. The Minister wanted a period in time in which the proper procurement exercise could be carried out at the same time an investigation into the issues pertaining to Red Sky could be carried out in regard to wider in the system.
Yes. So in terms of extending the period and the procurement and all of that,
Reducing it.
well, extending initially by 6 months and then talking about 4, that was an extension in the sense of beyond the 14th of July. It was beyond that period. You understand?
I think, though, the contract, I'm not sure, was it the 5th of July, the Housing Secretary were looking to terminate the contract?
No, I think the 14th was the termination date. Right. So the departmental, or the Minister's position was initially 6 months, then adjusted down to 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the advantage in that would be, of course, in part, not exclusively, to the new company that the Minister spoke of in the 27th of June meeting, that extra time would give the proposed new company time to progress matters. So that's where this all ties together, isn't it?
No,
The Minister had an anxiety that the proposed new company might be able to progress matters, to buy time. Mr. Brimstone explores with BDO how long they can carry on for.
Until the
Mr.
14th.
Brimstone advises the housing executive to look favourably or explores the possibility of this 4-month extension.
I think my exploration with BDO was around the 14th of July, no further.
But is that not the framework within which we're operating? That all of this was motivated by this urge to buy more time for the successors to Red Sky?
No, no.
That never entered your head, Mr. Brimstone, or can you not recall?
No, I'm perfectly clear as to
You
what the
can recall
motive.
that.
If I can answer the question.
I'm glad you can recall that.
Can I answer the question, Chair?
Okay, sorry, a second. Just, okay.
Answer the question.
Yes, please answer the question.
I know I'm quite clear as to what the motivation around all of this was. The Minister had concerns that have been backed up now by numerous reports as to the fact that the issues pertaining to Red Sky were more widely spread within the Housing Executive. The Minister was proved right in that. The Minister wanted a period of time in which we could A, put in place a proper procurement exercise and at the same time explore the issues which have now come to light, that they are much wider spread within the Housing Executive and the contractor associated with response maintenance.
Do you deny that the Minister wanted more time, in the words of this minute, so that the proposed new company might also be able to progress matters?
Well, I'm not aware of that.
What do you think that means, other than giving the successor to Red Sky time to get their act together?
You asked me a question and I answered it.
Okay, I mean, just for the record, or just, I mean, obviously, members around the table, including witnesses, may make statements at times and assertions. Their opinions doesn't necessarily mean it's fact. So to suggest that subsequent reports, in the way in which you said, or back up, whatever, that's not necessarily the case. So I'm just making that point. That's your view, and you may well, very, very well.
Is there an argument around that, Chair?
No, I'm not making an argument. All I'm saying is that you make a statement, it's your statement, it doesn't necessarily reflect the actual facts at the end of the day. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm making a point that other members, including witnesses, may make statements from time to time. So again, just a record, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're true or they reflect the conveying wisdom. That's all I'm making the point.
That can happen
But
with questioners as well,
Of course,
Chairman.
and I made that point. So you know, I made it and I repeated it there again. I just want to go back to a point earlier on there again. This is just, again, because it's come up in this evidence, happened 2 weeks in a row. And this in relation to remarks Sammy Wilson made earlier on and made them last week. When you characterised, Sammy, when you characterised Michael Sands last week, and I mean, we will check the Hansard report because I think some of these matters are beginning to get serious. As I mean, Michael Sands made it clear that he didn't accept your suggestion or your words around the Jenny Palmer's remarks. In fact, Mr. Sands went on to say he can't say it's untrue, and he talked about recollections. Equally, I didn't hear him saying at any point that Jenny Palmer was lying. So I'm just asking people to reflect on when they're making statements, or giving evidence, or questioning witnesses, or making statements or assertions, because we can't have people around this table quoting someone else as suggesting that somebody was telling lies, because these are serious statements. Again, I'm just trying to remind ourselves to be professional and be able to stand over what we say, whilst at the same token being very robust and challenging of any witness or indeed ourselves. That's what we're here to do. So I'm just asking people, and I will be reflecting on the Hansard remarks of this meeting to see the words that were actually used. I think they may well have been unfortunate and regrettable, but we'll check that on. We will return that on upon reading.
Chairman, I mean, what Michael Sands said, and this is what I quoted. I mean, first of all, he did not have such information that anybody was going mad looking for an email. There's no reason why anybody should be like that. Secondly, that he did not engage in such a conversation with Mrs. Palmer. Thirdly, that he never ever said the words. And my conclusion then is if Mr. Sands was so adamant, and he was not ambiguous, the Hansard will show that he was not ambiguous. I didn't actually say that he said it. I put it to him. He didn't wish to make comment. But if he didn't say the words, if he had no such conversation, if he indeed did not even remember anybody looking or going mad looking for an email, that then what Mrs Palmer said was untrue, so she must be lying.
Chair,
Well, I'm making a point. You brought it up. You raised it in the
I
context
didn't
of
say
talking
that
about
he
people.
said she was lying,
All
but
right.
I'm saying
Well, that's fair
that she
enough.
clearly she is not telling the truth, because we've had one witness who has given a total different.
All I'm drawing attention to is that in the context of, Tommy, you raised it in the context of people misrepresenting other people's remarks or comments or evidence to the committee. I'm just making a point that Michael Sallins didn't use any words about lying or untruths. He
I
actually
never
said
said
he
he
couldn't
did.
say it was untrue.
I
So
never
I'm only making that point and reminding people we're still in the inquiry. We still have witnesses, perhaps, to come here. We certainly have to deliberate on what we're saying. So I'm just been asking people to be professional and mindful of the remarks that they make and not attributed to me other people. Flores, you wanted the last point on that?
but Chair, it was just, I think it's interesting how one member seeks to ask her to actually come to the conclusion that one person is not telling the truth and the other one
Okay.
is,
That's-
and I think that underscores the
Okay,
lack
well,
of
that- I mean-
objectivity amongst some members.
Well, people will make their own minds up on all that in due course. Stephen, that there's no one else has indicated to ask any question at this moment in time. Are you happy enough? Is there any final remarks you want to make this morning? You do fully understand that if you so wish, you can come back to this committee in the very near future. Hopefully we'll be wrapping up the inquiry sooner rather than later, and obviously it will be within the decision of the committee if it so wish to pursue anything else with yourself. Okay, so
Are you
thank you.
coming back for a
your
sixth
time.
time then, Chairman, if you did that?
That remains to be seen.
okay, right.
I want to just stand adjourned for 5 minutes for a comfort break, no more than 5 minutes.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.
Yeah, before we move away from the inquiry, last week we had evidence from Mrs. Palmer which made reference to potentially Councillor Brown, she established that was Councillor Brown of Carrickfergus Council, may have overheard or been present at some conversations. Should the committee, in pursuit of that, not maybe write to, in fact, might be Alderman Brown, is it? Mm-hmm. Alderman Brown, and advise him of what was said and ask him, can he shed any light on these matters? Maybe he can't, maybe he can.
I presume we can do that, okay, and I don't think unless anybody sort of objects to that, then we should we should then probably just do that. But again, then, just in totality of all this, I mean, we've agreed that we're going to have our first run at assessing the evidence we have received so far, and I'm very pleased that the officials have been able to collate quite a bit of information we've received so far in this particular phase and phase 2 as well. They allow us to start assessing where the evidence has brought us to and what we might need to do to conclude the inquiry. Whether that means bringing other witnesses or not, then we can decide that formally. But our members happy enough, then we issue a letter to Alderman Brown just to advise him of that. That way, I'm Jim's outlined. Okay, thank you, members, for that. Okay, then can we move in the next item on the agenda, which is the tenant priorities for housing service. Could I formally welcome Jim and Madeleine? Jim Nelson, Madeleine Nelson. Could I apologise to yourselves again? I know you've been here for a while this morning. But obviously the inquiry was on this morning. We had to conduct our business accordingly. So apologise for any delay that you've had to endure this morning. I know you have other very important work to be doing as well. Part of the briefing today is really the Department's ongoing commitment to keep the committee informed of progress in relation to the social housing reform programme. And we have been notified that the Housing Secretary will also be looking at tenants' priorities in more depth than in the 2015 survey. So you have the Department briefing paper on page 75 of your pack. Have that. And then, Jim, then if you're happy enough, then if you just take it from here yourself, Jim and Madeleine, if you just give the committee the briefing.
Certainly. As you said, Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to brief the committee on the briefing paper we provided identifying tenant future priorities. Just to again reiterate the overall programme approach, and then Madeleine will maybe take us through some of the detail of the document, after which we'll be happy to take any questions. The committee will be aware we are committed to sort of continuous engagement with the committee on the social housing reform programme, the scope of which is to explore the potential for the reform of housing structures with a view to securing consensus on the way forward. We give the committee our briefing on the initial stage, which was all about fact-finding and research, and that was in February. And we also indicated the further work that we developed, what we call Phase 2, which is really a series of options, potential options for reform. Effectively, there are two work streams to the programme. One is looking at structural reform, with a particular focus on the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, including its landlord functions, how it manages its properties and its status, the regional functions, its strategic roles, covering housing all of Northern Ireland, both private and social housing supply, and also the roles and functions of the department. The aim is to produce an analysis of the current structures and assess potential options for improvement, and those will be assessed against key criteria, and we'll be engaging with the committee on this work. Obviously, one of the key criteria for looking at any change is what are the benefits in terms of meeting expectations of tenants, and that's trying to articulate some of that today. The second area is policy reform, which really is looking at the system, the policies within which the social housing system operates, and there are four key areas there. One is tenant participation, and indeed our consultation paper is published today on that one, and the committee was briefed on that earlier. Social housing rent policy, local government engagement, and the regulatory and inspection regime for social housing, and we'll be bringing forward proposals on those shortly to engage with the committee. As you'll be aware, the programme aim is to try and ensure that we have housing structures that support the provision of social and affordable homes in thriving communities where people are proud to live. And underneath that, we've got a number of key aims: to improve housing structures, if appropriate, making the system financially sustainable for tenants and the Northern Ireland Executive; ensure the delivery of well-maintained housing stock and increased investment in social housing more generally; improve the focus on the delivery of housing strategy and regional delivery of housing services, and to create space and freedom for social landlords by a much more proactive role in the communities they serve. And those were principles that were underpinned, for example, in our discussions around tenant participation. Phase 2 of the programme is about developing options and the policy proposals for both these strands of works. As I said, we previously talked to you about tenant participation. The document today is entitled Identifying Tenant Future Priorities. It's a key findings from research carried out with a section of the Housing Executive tenants. Clearly, this will be an important building block as we look at to inform criteria that we might adjudge improvement. We'll also be shortly bringing forward proposals to you on rent and on social housing regulation and inspection. It's probably the next consultation document we'll be engaging. Then thereafter, social housing rent policy, and we've already had some briefing on the complexities around that area, and also finally looking at proposals for local government engagement. The final piece of work will probably be about the structures, and we want to bring those as one bunch rather than looking at, say, the department, looking at the regional housing body, because all the structures interact together. And again, we'll be engaging throughout that. In particular, we'll say what's the best strategic regional housing service should be and could be delivered, how landlord and regional functions sit together or apart, best to deliver tenant services, investment, social housing, and where the regulatory function should sit. As we've previously said to the committee, in all our deliberations we range from do-nothing option up to some significant changes. Returning to the document we're briefing you on today, when we briefed the committee on the programme in February, we said we would consider the future needs of tenants across Northern Ireland and how that should inform any proposals. To that end, the Department has commissioned, through the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, a survey of a broad selection of tenants. I'm pleased to share those key findings with you today. I'll ask Madeline now to take you through some of the detail of those findings in terms of that survey work.
Great, Jim, thank you.
Okay, so just some context, I suppose. As Jim said, in this stage, what we're trying to do is collect more information, but also update information from the last phase. So you'll be aware we've got quite a major stock condition survey happening at the moment in the Housing Executive stock, just to determine the investment need. At the same time, we're also looking at the implications of emerging rent policy. But one of the key elements of additional information we needed was to dig a little bit deeper on kind of what tenants' views are, particularly around identifying what's important to tenants now and in the future, and what's a priority for them. And it's a priority in terms of the home, so the condition of the home and relating to improvements and repairs, the environment, but also the services currently offered by the Housing Executive. And we very much kind of wanted to do this with the Housing Executive, so we've done it as part of their continuous survey. That's carried out each year, and I think within the survey there's a section where you can ask kind of specific questions, or if they've got a specific issue during the year, they might want to focus on a bit more detail. So we use that really to try and identify a number of questions that would pull out, again, kind of what's important now, but also in the future, that's going to inform some of the considerations around the options and the structures. It's very much preliminary research, so it's kind of giving us some high-level findings from tenants. Having said that, we've had a number of sessions, kind of tenant engagement sessions we've called them, which have been with the Housing Executive's kind of existing tenant groups. That's through the Housing Community Network, but also some of the scrutiny panels that the Housing Executive have set up. And whilst we're still collating that information from the engagement sessions, quite a few of the things that were mentioned during those engagement sessions anecdotally do kind of concur with what the research has come out with. It's not a critique, and it's not meant to be a critique. It's like with any research, it's just about trying to get some insight from customers to help the programme as well as the Housing Executive perhaps focus some of the areas that it wants to in terms of kind of business improvement and modernisation. So I won't go through it kind of page by page, but I've picked out some of the key headings that I think are perhaps findings that have come out through the more kind of anecdotal evidence that we've had from some of the sessions, the engagement sessions with tenants. So repairs and improvements to the home, top priority for kind of future improvement, but also kind of top priority now in terms of importance. The research also, I think, kind of draws attention to tenants' desire that for the future the condition of their homes doesn't get any worse and that the homes are maintained. So I think they're probably two kind of key things to pull out. Having said that, the general satisfaction with repair service is fairly high, 84%. But tenants do still see that as an opportunity in an area for improvement in the future. And similarly, around the quality of housing, again, kind of quite high overall satisfaction, but it's seen as an area for future improvement and of kind of high importance to tenants. There are some areas to do with the property. I suppose where the survey has highlighted perhaps a number of areas where there are opportunities to improve in the future, and that's around energy efficiency to homes, but also dealing with empty properties. And again, that's something that's probably come out in some of the anecdotal feedback that we've had from the tenant engagement sessions as well. There are also opportunities around service improvement, again, because what we tried to do was understand what tenants felt about the property, but also about the services. So some of the areas perhaps that the housing executive and future, in the future needs to look at in terms of service improvement was around money and debt advice, dealing with antisocial behaviour and the way in which the housing executive deals with moves and transfers. So again, kind of not a critique, but just highlighting some areas that perhaps tenants see as important for now, but also important in the future in terms of service improvement. You see figure 7 and figure 8 summarises some of that and just kind of puts it into the bar chart about what's important to tenants now and in the future. Some of the questions kind of towards the end, we asked around how important it is to tenants that they're involved in kind of future decision making, and also involved in the future decision making around the structure of the new landlord. And you'll see from the results of the survey that tenants said, yeah, that's really important to us. One, we want to be consulted, and secondly, we want to be involved in kind of future decision making, which I think very much links back into the consultation document that's been launched today by the department on improving tenant participation. So just kind of give you a flavour, I think, of the results. What we're going to do with it now is to use it to follow up some questions, again working through the housing executive's existing research approach, but we'll be kind of trying to get a bit more information and dig a little bit deeper. So just for example, so what do tenants mean by a better and more efficient repair service? Where they've said improvements to the home are of top priority, what does that mean? What types of improvements? So we'll be looking to use that information to kind of triangulate that with the stock condition survey findings, just to start to build up a picture of what the standard should be now and into the future of improving homes, particularly picking up things like energy efficiency and improvements to the environment. So plan is to use it, add into the kind of the massive information that we're getting, but also probably go back with the housing executive to go back out to tenants to ask a little bit more detail and just to explore some of the findings that have come back, explore that in a bit more depth.
Okay, Mary, thanks for that. Jim, I mean, before I bring members in, just a couple of wee points, because I kind of work out a couple of things jar with me a wee bit in terms of the process, but I'm very pleased, obviously, that this is going to be followed up.
Yeah.
And a lot more detail, so, and a lot of cross-referencing, but I mean, I'm looking at figures there, say, we're dealing with 6, 7, questions 6, 7 and 8, for example, around services. So what you're saying is there are a lot of, I think only 18% of people are saying that be prepared to pay for additional services.
Yeah.
Most of the rest don't. But it's only 18% are then questioned as to what additional services may they want. So my view would be, well, with the high number of people who are saying they wouldn't want to pay,
Yeah.
if they were actually told what those services might be,
Yeah.
Yes.
Then they would
you get a different answer?
Yeah.
And equally, you have a high proportion of people saying that they have no interest in, well, maybe not that word, but they don't want to be more involved in how the housing tech would run their estate. In my experience, you know, and you'll know certainly in some constituencies, there'll be a lot of active local people and communities, residents associations who would want to make really sure that that their voice would be heard as tenants and representatives of tenants. So I'm just trying to work out as
I think it's important as well that it's relative. You know, while it may seem like a low number, that's actually quite a high number. You know, so Midland actually reflected on that. While it's a low percentage of 100 people, but people who want to be actively involved, that's actually a relatively high number.
Okay.
So it is, you know, across the tenant base, that's a high number of people saying we do want to have some active engagement in how the houses are run, how estates are
And I
managed.
presume that
And I
would be
think-
much higher in some constituencies as opposed to perhaps
This was
others.
abroad.
Definitely. So we need to go in more depth, and it was only 6 months' worth of surveys as well. So we probably need to increase the sample size. And on the issue around payment for services and additional payment for additional services, again, we just need to explore that in a bit more detail, because that might be that tenants feel, well, they're already paying enough and they expect to be getting the service that they want to get. So it's kind of digging a bit more detail about what types of services, but also if they're saying, well, we don't want to pay any more, is that because you're not getting the right services at the moment, or you are getting the right services and you're happy with them? So it's just exploring that in more detail.
But it also, the reason that's important to us as well is that it means that if you are, because we're very clear that whatever we do in the Social Housing Reform Programme, any proposals need to be clearly understood by a whole wide range of stakeholders. So if there's proposals coming forward for any change and they have impacts on rent or whatever, then it's quite clear that survey is telling us before you do anything like that, you need to make sure a tenant understands what it is, might be the return on any increase in payment, if there is to be one.
4 members indicating so far for St. Sammy and Stuart and Jim. Okay.
Jim, Madeline, thanks for the presentation. It's certainly fairly interesting, and I think that you can go back a few years, you know, that and whilst there was serious problems at certain levels within the housing executive, that by and large that the housing executive have always received a very high satisfaction rating from their tenants, and certainly in their participation in communities right across the board. Something, I may add, that you would not find if you went in see the same satisfaction rating with many housing associations, and that's right across in terms of the provision of maintenance, their connection with communities, governance within housing associations. So I think when we get into these deeper arguments about housing, you know, and the structure of housing, we should remember that. But I think that when decisions are being made, and I know that the community, the housing community network, does provide interesting, has interesting discussions and come up with different projects that allows them to bring things forward, especially within in their own communities. You know, there's a much wider group of people out there, and Alec touched on it. You know, I'm under no illusions that 18% probably is high, because in any community, you know, that most of the work is done by so few people, and I think that's the thing. The kinds, it doesn't mean that people are not interested by what goes on around them, but they are doing it. And I've always had this thing that in terms of, if you ask people about what they like about the various housing structures, one of them will always be rent. You know, that housing executive rents are considerably lower than many of the housing associations are. The service that they provide is much better. I know that there are many there that I would like to see it going towards community enterprise within many areas. The good provision of say, debt advice, how to deal with arrears, and I think that's what makes a good community structure. I have been a bit concerned, I know you said whatever landlord may come out of it in future. And I thought that was a decision that politicians were going to make, but what is going on within the housing executive at present certainly isn't, because we've already went way down the road of separation between strategic and regional and landlord. I know, Jim, you've said before that that's a decision that the housing executive makes, but it's part and parcel of the whole social housing reform programme. I think at the end of the day, these are all good exercises. It does provide you with information, and I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is to have these types of discussion and allow us to move forward.
Certainly, I mean, for our perspective, our key responsibility in the Social Housing Reform Programme is to build up a clear body of information and facts, and also, in terms of tenant priorities, to set things that we would expect to achieve from any changes. I think it's worthwhile mentioning the housing associations do a tenant satisfaction survey annually, and NIFA has collected those. I mean, some things are broadly comparable. The last figures we have is that satisfaction with the services provided is 88 on average for the housing executive and 87 for the housing associations. But your views are being taken into account. 74% for the housing associations, 72% for housing executive. You're kept informed that things that might affect you as a tenant, 88% housing associations, 82% housing executive. Are you happy with the rent you're paying? 88% housing executive, 77% housing associations. Now, what I'm saying is, there are comparisons, and sometimes we go by the information. Sometimes anecdotes vary from estate to estate and integration to integration.
Broadly comparable. I suppose this and the questions around this survey was trying to look forward and to say, rather than asking questions around are you satisfied with current, it's more about the future. So what's important and what's a priority, again, in terms of kind of the home, the environment and services, so that if you are looking to make decisions about changing things, you make sure that those changes are going to deliver what outcomes you want to get.
It's not about criticism, it's about, in an ideal world, what would you like to see improve? And then we would say, well, if we're not making any recommendations that don't improve this, that becomes a measurement.
Okay. Tommy?
Just on the 1,700 people who were surveyed, first of all, how were those chosen?
I think they're randomly selected. It's carried out by Ipsos Mori last year, so I think they're randomly selected across 34 areas of the housing exec stock.
Okay. I just wondered on that, because given the difficulty that many residents associations have in even getting tenants to attend the residents' meetings, the fact that 82% thought it was important to be represented on the board, or 81% thought they should be involved in developing housing, etc.
Yeah.
It just struck that involvement struck me, or desire to be involved struck me as odd, because it's not reflected
in tenant
people's
groups.
involvement locally.
I suppose it could come down to how much influence you think you're going to have. You might have more influence if you're a tenant involved in a board as opposed to just being consulted in a tenants association. I don't know.
I think it's also, we always know we're all questionnaires. So these questionnaires are sent out and they're followed up, I think, house to house.
Yeah.
So if someone asks you to fill them in,
face-to-face.
sometimes people will answer yes to a question but may not follow that up with action.
Yeah. I think the face-to-face, as Jim said, so I suppose you might, in theory, in a face-to-face interview, you get a more reliable answer.
The second thing that struck me as a bit odd about the survey, and maybe we as public representatives get the views we get from tenants are skewed because they usually come to us with the bad story. But I'm surprised that antisocial behaviour is so low in the
satisfaction
issues that they have raised with you here. I mean, what was actually the question on that?
I think it was how satisfied you are with the way in which the housing executive deals with antisocial behaviour. So it's quite a low-ish percentage.
Bigger 5.
Satisfied. Yeah. And that, certainly from some of the engagement sessions, and again, they were kind of anecdotal and tend to be people who are already involved. That was mentioned a lot as well, about the need to improve the way in which the landlord deals with antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, just, I would have expected a much, far heavier response, or higher response on that one.
Right.
And just the last issue, and it's around improvements to property. And the fact that, and again, quite a high percentage of people say that improvements should be given priority.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, you know, the number of tenants, 75% of tenants had had improvements within the last 2 years. That tell you something about either the kinds of improvements. I just wonder, are you intend to dig down on that?
Yeah.
You know, here people are still saying that improvements to my home are important.
Yep.
Yet 75% have had improvements in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Is it that the improvements that the housing executive are carrying out are not what people want? Are they not carried out satisfactorily? Or have we raised expectations that we almost improve people's homes on a yearly basis, which of course wouldn't happen in the private sector?
Yeah.
I think it's probably a combination of all of those, and I think in improvements we would include repairs. You know, so it could have been a repair.
Yeah.
But I think it is partly there was an improvement, but maybe I wanted a comprehensive improvement, and I know, so I've got windows done, but I know I have to wait for something else. So it's a mixture of, yes, there's been work done on a fairly regular basis, and the housing side would indicate that, you know, they would have a high percentage of engagement with some sort of improvement in their schemes. So I think it's a commentary on A, what's been done, B, what they would like to have been done, and I think as well there was some eye to the future of what we would want to see in our property.
Definitely, because it may have just been one improvement, and actually, as Jim was saying, it's more about, okay, well, I've had windows done, but actually, the kitchen needs doing, or the bathroom needs doing, and
I think the other area which is very important, which is, you know, Madeline's mentioned, we're trying to build up, if you like, a whole set of evidence that will have 4 criteria and say, well, here's what we measure, whether doing something makes it better or not. So first of all, we're working out what is the nature of the stock. That's a stock condition survey. Then we're working out what the tenants want. And the third critical factor is what is the right standard we should be setting for what you're trying to achieve. And if you set standard A, does it, you know, meet the improvement you need to do? Does it meet tenants' expectations? What's the cost of it? If you set standard B, what's the cost of it? So that's the third sort of piece of the jigsaw that we'd be bringing to the committee. So we'll come back with a stock condition survey and we'll say, well, it means A, B, C, or E, depending on what standard. Here is the standard. Now, it'll not be just made up. It'll be informed by what tenants want, but it'll also be informed by commonly applied standards in other jurisdictions and by other social housing providers.
And how much of the consultation was done via the tenant engagement panels? I mean, I take it some of these people were actually gone and interviewed in their homes, but you also said that some of it was done through tenant engagement panels.
yeah.
What percent?
So the results in here are all from the survey that that Ipsos Moro carried out. So these are all face-to-face interviews. In addition, we then held a number of engagement sessions with tenant reps and the Housing Community Network. So they're not in the results.
Okay.
But I think kind of what I was trying to say was some of the feedback that we got in those sessions concurred with this, yeah.
But some also put a different weighting on. I think from those sessions we would have had
I think there's one salary lesson as well from the very first question. More and more, I mean, we were talking about it last week when we talked about pensions and how we're going to convey to people about pension changes.
Yeah.
Out of the responses, only 3% were saying that they wanted to be communicated with by electronic means.
Yeah.
The rest were
By post and
Twitter.
papers.
The vast majority of these.
Let's go down a Twitter road here now. Cover that on the last side.
Which one though?
Okay, Stuart,
Thank you, Chair.
no tweeting allowed now.
Thank you, Chair. Where is all of this taking us in terms of the future of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive?
Well, where it's taken us is that part of the programme where we said we want to look at the structures, and in order to look at structures you need to know what it is you're trying to achieve. So what we need to know what do we have to address in terms of financial obligations via maintenance and repair. What is it we're trying to achieve via tenant aspirations, via standards that should be achieved, and then you measure the existing structures. How far do they achieve it? Where's the gap?
Yeah.
You look at potential changes to existing structures. How far do they meet those gaps? And then you say, well, taking all this into account on a factual basis, here is a recommended
On
change.
on the basis of the answers to these questions, forgive me if I've got my interpretation of it wrong, the vast majority of people are either satisfied or very satisfied in terms of the services which they're getting. Now, you have asked them future questions, I understand that. How do you see the fabric of your building in the future and things like that? But it is overwhelmingly positive in favour of the housing executive.
I mean, I suppose kind of when...
Which I have to sort of say isn't a surprise to me.
No, definitely. And I think it's more about, if you ask the question, are you satisfied? I suppose generally most people would say, yeah, it's fine. But if you said, what could we do better? Then that's kind of a different question, isn't it? So people would say, yeah, I'm satisfied with the house, but actually I would be completely delighted if it was, if I had more improvements to the home. So again, it's kind of trying to look ahead to say, if social housing is a kind of a precious thing, you need to be in a position to be able to keep that and to maintain that over the period of time. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is understand from the tenant's point of view kind of what's important and what would keep that in good quality.
I think there's also a side issue, which is if you're satisfied with what you're receiving, then we know the standard you have. What would happen if you weren't able to meet that standard? And that's there's a maintenance issue as well.
No, I understand. The other side of these questions is, have you asked or do you intend to ask the housing executive how they deliver on these issues which you've asked for? In other words, have you asked the housing executive, you know, how they intend to improve housing? I'm looking at any of the questions. Are they aware of what might worry tenants about the future of their home? So, do you intend to reverse these questions effectively in a simplistic way and put them to the housing executive? Because my feeling is, as working with tenants groups over a very long period of time, is that, you know, with various bumps along the way, the housing executive does address the vast majority of these issues with their tenants.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, well, this is the housing executive research, so they will be using it to inform any kind of priorities for improvement or modernisation. And I think at the same time, I know they've recognised that they perhaps need to change some of the questions in the main survey to help them do that. And as far as I understand, I think they're working with the tenants group to do that, to redesign the survey so that it starts to kind of ask those questions and say, okay, if you're not satisfied with it, or we could do better, what does that mean?
I think as well, I mean, and it is important to stress, you know, the purpose of the social housing reform programme is not to critique what we're doing, but not on the basis of everything that's happening is wrong. It's actually to ask the question: can structures facilitate things being done better, or more importantly, are there risks with the current structures that we mightn't be able to maintain the same level of service that we've got?
But given the commonality of the answers between housing associations and the housing executive, at some stage we're going to have to take a consideration as to whether to put all our eggs in the one basket. And it seems to me that the two running side by side are actually providing virtually identical levels of satisfaction.
Well, certainly, I mean, as the committee knows, we've said broadly the options we'd be looking at are do nothing, do something, do a bit of something. So, you know, really, you know, we will be looking at from doing no change at all. And
do the full range.
And no change at all is actually not no change. No change at all is very slow change of percentages because the housing associations need to build. Secondly, saying, well, does a mixed model work? Is it the right mix? Should we be moving towards, in England, Scotland, Wales as well? We're 80-30 or 80-20 or 70-30 in parent-centred percentages. Scotland's 50-50, England's 60-40, and on the other one, or should be doing like some large councils have done, which is 100%. But we'll be assessing all of those, but equally, we'll only be assessing them to make a recommendation for a decision by Minister's Executive.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim, and then Dolores.
Just picking up on Stuart's first question. You're asking all these questions, and somewhere down the road, and the strength of commitment and might be debatable, but somewhere down the road, the policy idea is essentially to get rid of the housing executive.
No.
to reform.
The cat's out of the bag, Armand.
Exactly.
If it's same house, same people.
As a, you know, in terms of, you know, what we have is housing structures in Northern Ireland that have been existing. We've got housing executive has a strong regional function. It also is the largest social landlord.
Yeah.
We're posing the question. We all know that there are challenges facing public sector bodies and social landlords. There's challenges coming from maintenance. There's challenges coming from improvement. So the answer is to look at, can we improve in structures and make recommendations?
Well, and take the social landlord function away.
Well, that would be an option to be considered.
Yes, but in all this consultation, you haven't asked
I know.
the tenants. You know, you're prepared to ask them these myriad of questions, but the big elephant in the room, you don't want to hear from them.
Well, I think the question, I mean, because we've been asked that question a number of times, and in the first view we said that the clear view from stakeholders is that if you were to suggest any change to a tenancy, to a tenant's landlord, then the tenant groups that we consulted as stakeholders suggested that that would have to be done in the normal process, and the normal process at the moment involves when a decision is reached, you put the option to tenants and they...
But you come here today and you tell us you're so interested in what the tenants want about these issues. Don't ask them the big question. So will you ever be interested in their answer to the big question?
I suppose the big question, sorry, the big question needs to be asked when you know what the big question is. Yeah. And the query for me is, you could say to the tenant, would you like to move from housing executive? The answer would be, why? But if you look at where that question has been posed, and I'm not saying it is a question to be posed, when it has been posed, it says to a tenant, you're in property A, here is an offering from a housing association to do X or Y in relation to that property. Do you wish to move or not? So the big question is not a question about do you want to be with the housing executive or not. The big question is actually to a tenant, here is an offering to you on option A or option B, which one do you want to choose?
Well, let's maybe put it another way.
It's a slightly different question.
Given the importance you say attaches to this level of survey, what level of importance will attach to the views of housing executive tenants if there is to be that strategic and radical change?
Well, again, there's two levels of radical change. It depends what the change is to be. At one level,
you probably know more than most about that. So.
Well, I know the work we're doing to inform the advice the options we recommend, and the information we provide. But at a high level, the change could be nothing. There's no change proposed, so therefore there's no question posed. But there may be some information flowing about what can realistically be expected in terms of maintenance and repair against available budget. There may be a change that says we want to contain housing in the public sector, but we think it's better to have one public body concentrating on regional services, one concentrating on being a landlord, which some councils in England have done. They've created an arm's length body. That's two public bodies. There's no actual change there. There may be a change that says we want all the landlord function to be managed in the housing association sector, and we want to create a new big housing association. That's a question to be posed to tenants. It may be we want part of it to go, and that's a question to be posed. So until you're clear on what you're implementing.
But would it not be informative to your policy-making process to ask and to find out what tenants actually think?
Yeah, clearly it's not only important to know, but it's an important answer at the end, because we've said any changes will be subject.
At the end, if it's a fait accompli, it's not a very important question.
It's not a fait accompli. Sorry, until you ask the tenant a question, the context of the question is very important. So if you were to ask a tenant, do you want to move from a housing executive tenant into a housing association tenant, you'd need to tell the full, you have to pose the full question. Here's why.
We know 86% want to be consulted on the future of the landlord. Mm-hmm. So when there is a question to ask, that would need to be taken into account.
Just a slightly
I think
different
there's
matter,
a question about would you rent from a housing association as well, which I thought was quite surprising. But actually, quite a high number said yes, and quite a high number said maybe.
I think it's important as well to remember, in terms of Whether you're a housing association tenant or a housing executive tenant depends on the property you're offered at the time when your offer's made. If you're on the social housing waiting list and you come to the top of that list and you're to be offered a social home, whether it's a housing executive home or a housing association home, it's whatever's available at the time you're at top of the list.
Just two different
It
questions.
doesn't actually make they're all social homes.
Two separate questions. Question 5 asked how important are each of the following aspects of living in your home, and very important and important combined on tenants having a greater say in the running of a housing executive, an answer of 80%.
Yeah.
Let me go to question 8 now. It's a different issue, but it's parallels. Would you like to be more involved in the way the housing executive runs your area? 86% no. How do you rationalise those sort of answers?
I suppose the nature of a survey is reporting the answers. The rationalisation comes in as the interrogation and reason. So clearly, yeah, that's something to tease out. And what's the difference between the two? And it actually strikes the heart of some of the comments members made about, that seems quite high or it seems quite low. What does it? What does it actually mean? But on the face of it, they are two. The same persons actually, in most cases, answered this question. It's not different people, so the same persons ticked yes, one,
And I think that's the point. It can.
These are done in interviews.
Yes. The face
So
to face.
there's a housing executive staff member or some agency there.
It's Ipsos Mori carry it
Okay.
out on behalf of the executive. I think.
So they're not just sitting at home ticking a box.
No.
They're actually.
I don't know how much probing they do, or whether it's just a kind of a closed.
Jumped out at me as a bit odd.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, some of it, I think that's why we need to explore it in a little more detail, because again, satisfaction with repairs looks relatively high, but at the same time, the survey results are saying that's an area for improvement. So again, it's kind of back to that question: if you're asked, are you satisfied? Yeah, it's okay, but actually, could you do better? Yes, you could. So you just need to understand in a bit more detail.
Sorry, I had one last question for you. The very end of the survey. Yes, the very last point. 19% of those surveyed do not receive housing benefits.
Yeah.
Is that reflective of the overall picture?
Yes,
Yeah.
broadly.
Pretty close.
Broadly, it's about
Broadly,
20%.
Okay.
And that would be across both sectors, the housing executive and the housing association sector.
And could I suggest that a preferred answer from you earlier on to your question from Jim around the future of the housing executive might have been something like, well, maybe in the minds of some people, abolish the housing executive, there's certainly no decision as such has been taken, but the whole work, on a serious note, of a social housing reform programme is to, issue by issue, is to gather up evidence which will give those decision makers, which will include people in this room, a future, to base a future decision on about how we progress social housing in the future. So
And again, what we're
that'd be
saying
my
is
preferred
part of
answer.
our option is to produce a preferred option upon which views would be sought.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so there was no decision to do what Jim was suggesting earlier on.
Sure.
Okay.
Just one comment on that, please. And the point that I've continuously made, and we've been told that that's a decision's been made in the housing executive. That process has already started within the housing executive. All that Jim was talking about and all that is contained within the social housing reform programme deals with stuff that's already happened within the housing executive, and that's a separation from regional.
I'm not disputing any of that. I'm just been
But
partially
the decision has been
facetious,
taken from us.
putting on the record that there isn't a decision, even though it may well be the view of some people in the College of Housing Executive. That decision has not been taken, and it will be taken on the basis of evidence produced and political agreement. Okay, so Dolores.
Well, Chair, I'm delighted that there are a few other cynics in the room, besides myself, whenever it comes to the matter of the closure of the housing executive social landlord function by stealth. And somebody who worked in the health service, I well know the games that people play in order to close facilities, and I would state on the record again, that's nothing that we will stand over. And I think it's interesting in relation to the questions posed. I don't think any of it's rocket science, Chair. You know, you could nearly sit in the office and fill this all out yourself, although it's good to have, I suppose, some evidence. But if you'd asked any of us MLAs, we could have told you what a lot of the major issues were for people. And One area that hasn't been looked at is actually the responsibility of other departments in relation to housing estates. And, for example, the poor state of much of the roads maintenance and the footpaths and street lighting within our housing executive estates is something that surely should be ascertained by yourselves, and surely you within DSD or the housing executive should be acting alongside political representatives as advocates for improved service provision from other departments within the area of the stock that you own. I'm just puzzled as to why that has never seemed to have been an issue raised by yourselves as a matter of concern, whenever we all, at least in many of my areas, most of the roadways are nothing better than patchwork quilts, and quite often would win pothole prizes in what is, I believe, today Pothole Day. So, you know, I mean, if you're talking about community safety, and then the other thing, Chair, is, I mean, they were talking about core public services. I mean, and there's a debate Monday. So what is the core public service of the Housing Executive and DSD? I note within your paper that you talk about it's about better and improved tenant empowerment, and I support that. I also recognise that many of our housing estates, a vast majority of some, are actually owner-occupied now and don't actually have many housing executive tenants. I'm just wondering how you capture some of the information from those who are now living in formerly owned housing executive properties in terms of their views on antisocial behaviour and the wider environment, or whether you don't take that into consideration at all. And it's a very narrow focused with, I think many of us would believe, a predetermined outcome as to the evidence gathered and to where this is all leading.
I mean, there are housing executive retains estate management responsibilities for their estates. However, you know, their primary focus is their tenants. Obviously, a lot of estates now would be described as mixed tenure, and by mixed tenure, there could be owner-occupied, social housing tenants, or private rented. Within those estates, I mean, it is important that the focus of this work is on social housing, and that's where we're looking at social housing tenants. There is wider work within the department, and we will be bringing proposals shortly to the committee in terms of the private rented sector, also in terms of fitness standards that would apply across all tenure types. But you know, there is a mixed bag. I know the housing executive does work quite closely with the other statutory providers in relation to maintenance issues within their estates. We also, as you know, have interestingly some pilot on the Building Successful Communities pilots, where we've tried to create local forums where the other statutory bodies, in particular Road Service, others, City Council, all participate, and it is interesting, I would say, and we'll be able to give the committee an update on some of it. That work shortly. The initial meetings of those forums have interestingly focused on some of the issues you've raised as particular concerns, you know, street lighting, pathways, and it is interesting that when we have those local forums and face-to-face contacts, all the statutory bodies have shown a real willingness to work at that local level.
Chair, I don't think you need the programme Building Successful Communities to get that. I mean, we've been doing that in Craigavon for a long time, having stakeholders, you know, funded by the local council, I have to say, coming together to discuss such issues. So I don't think we need to spend money on it to do that. But the concern that I have in all of this is that it appears to me that those, or the agency that did the survey on your behalf, did not make it clear to the participants that it may be that some of the information gathered would then be used as evidence potentially to move the housing executive stock to housing associations. Now, is there anywhere where that question was put or that information was given to the participants in the survey?
Well, my understanding is, and I'll double check it with you, is that obviously the survey was not our survey. The survey is the Housing Executive Survey. This was a few questions within it. I think there was a descriptor of what the Social Housing Reform Programme is, which the Chair has described, which is an exploration without any decisions on potential future changes to structures. So it wouldn't have been as explicit, but they would have been advised that this information will help inform the Social Housing Reform Programme. Here is what the Social Housing Reform Programme is about. And there is a tenant newsletter that the Housing Executive issued where they've been quite clear as to what the Social Housing Reform Programme is.
They were asked about paying the rent
Yes.
to the housing association.
Yeah.
They were asked about changes in
Your tenancy, yeah.
who the tenant of. So I mean, if it wasn't explicit, it was certainly implicit.
There would have been a brief on what the social housing reform programme is as well.
We all know there's a level of scepticism around the table, as always, and that's something that's quite healthy, so.
But just one final point, I think it's on page, on the paper pack 151, which refers to two things would be necessary for tenant empowerment. One would be a change in legislation, if we were to be similar to England and Wales, for example. Is that,
This is a tenant participation strategy reference.
yeah. And the other is a right to manage, a right to transfer and community cashback initiatives. I don't know anything about community cashback. I just wondered what that was.
Just for clarity, this is referenced in the tenant participation consultation paper that was issued today. It's not within the survey work. The committee, we were briefed the committee on that a while back. Yes, there is legislation in England which, and we're asking the question in the consultation paper, which isn't just of tenants, this is a widespread consultation paper. Legislation in England and Wales, I think, that allows local authority tenants to enter into agreements to do work on the estates and be paid for that work, to request an asset transfer, that they can take control of the management and to have greater says on rights to transfer. At the moment, a transfer would take place in Northern Ireland where the housing executive would go to the tenants and say, we are considering a stock transfer, let's have your views on it. In England, a group of tenants can come together and go to the authority and say, we'd like to be considered for transfer. That's what those questions pose, and we're saying, is this something you'd like to think about in Northern Ireland? By the way, if you did, we'd have to change the legislation.
But that's not in
this survey.
No,
That's in the consultation document.
That's very beyond our discussion.
Thank you, Chair.
But we'll obviously come back to that because it is an important issue. Stuart?
So just very briefly, Chair, I forgot to ask earlier on, in asking these questions either directly by the Housing Executive or yourselves in future questioning, what consideration is given to placing a question in surveys with regards to tenants' acceptability of shared space and integrated housing?
That actually, I'm fairly certain, and I'll double check for you, it's not in the social housing reform questions, but I think it's in the Housing Executive's general survey, and I think it's also a question at application stage. But I'll come back to the committee and confirm that. So it's not specific to our programme, but it is in the survey.
But it's a serious omission if it's not in the social housing reform programme.
But we'd pick it up as part of the main survey anyway.
It's in the housing strategy. You know, it's understanding the programme is one particular aspect. We have a big housing strategy around that, of which a key element is shared housing, and we're also advancing number initiatives on that.
It's so aspirationally high, it's no earthly use, is what you're telling us.
No. What I'm saying is, the social housing reform programme is very focused on tenant services and tenant strategy. The future delivery of housing, including their issues like shared housing. You know, there is a housing strategy which has that as a section. So, for example, our housing strategy has 5 sections. This is one section. There's another section, which is about shared housing, and we have a number of initiatives in that.
But the views of tenants, I suppose the point is Stuart trying to get at there, or the views of tenants.
The view of tenants
on board.
You're asking future questions about how you want your property maintained, how you want to manage it. Why should you not also ask questions about the space you want to live in as well?
I think it is asked, but not in this wee section of. The 5 questions we've given you were part of about a page survey. We've only extracted those bits that were specific.
And could perhaps for the near future, could maybe just that formally be put to Stuart, in fact put to the committee, because it was asked how would those kind of views then be put into ongoing deliberations around future provision for social housing. Is that fair enough, Stuart?
Yes, thank you.
That's your question. Okay, no other member asking any question at the moment. Jim, Madeline, and unless if you have any final remarks to make at the moment, then please do so.
I'd like to say we will be back with the committee as we progress on these matters.
Okay, look, I thank you both and thank the department for a lot of work that is underway, and there's quite a body of evidence being built up as we speak, and that will continue for a while yet, so can appreciate. Thank yourselves for the work undertaken already, and thank your officials for involvement in that delivery of that, and coming here to the committee to give us a briefing and answer members' questions. And obviously we'll be hearing back from you again in the next stage of these deliberations. That's fair enough. Okay, thanks very much, Madeline. Jim, thank you. Good afternoon, as opposed to good morning. Moving on, members, just very briefly to correspondence. Just the final correspondence memo on page 107 of your pack. It's just funny enough that we've correspondence from the Rural Community Network, and they've written to us on behalf of the Rural Residents Forum, seeking to meet the committee to discuss issues of social housing in rural communities. The members content and we schedule that at some point if possible. And just to remind members that NICEM also forwarded to the committee through myself the anonymous complaint regarding a member of Social Security Agency staff, and that's in your page 109 of your pack for your attention. I mean, it's a controversial enough issue. I mean, as it was been, I'm not sure if it has been dealt with appropriately, but maybe people want to reflect on our correspondence in your pack, and then we'll come back to perhaps next week if members want to do that. Members, again, we have a thank you letter from the Private Tenants Forum after our recent meeting with them. So on that basis, then, our members then content to accept the correspondence as per the memo.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much, members. And then forward work programme, we have that on page 210 of your pack. Members agree with the forward work programme. Always a movable feast, as we say. Last item was AOB. Anybody want to raise anything under any other business? If not, that meeting stands adjourned. And we return here next Thursday, 22nd of January.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.